Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. February 12, 2001 Wrestling Observer Newsletter debut of the XFL, Stan Hansen retires, more. Dave Meltzer. By Dave Meltzer. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228, ISSN 1083 9593 February 12, 2001. With fan and media reaction after its debut all across the board and a huge buzz leading to a monstrous television rating, the only way to review the debut of the XFL over the weekend is this. Despite what sports people may think and even hardcore fans of sports may think, the majority of people attend sporting events as well as wrestling events based on quality of hype. They enjoy themselves based on quality of atmosphere of the show and going home happy, either the babyface prevailing at the end or the home team prevailing. If you have a good time, you want to go back. But to get the masses to attend, the masses have to also believe what they are attending is hot or in some ways important, either in a mainstream way or in a niche way. The show drew a 9.49 rating and 17 share, leading it to being easily the highest rated show on television for the night. NBC had drawn a 4.7 the previous Saturday night. Strongest metered markets were Las Vegas at 17.7, which was where the first game was played, and Minneapolis at 14.9, which is the home city of the league's biggest drawing card, announcer Jesse Ventura. It also drew a 12.5 in Birmingham and an 11.4 in Memphis as the next two highest markets, both cities with franchises. New York, even with a franchise and in the market with the most media hype and with a team in the game, drew right at the national average with a 9.5, a number SmackDown often approaches. Weakest markets were Salt Lake City 6.5, Miami 7.1, and Hartford 7.3. The rating was drawn by nothing but hype, and if this league is successful, it will go a long way toward establishing Vince McMahon, for better or worse, mainstream, as the great sports promoter of our time. All four live venues drew more than 30,000 fans for the opening weekend, including people legitimately turned away in Orlando, where they didn't open the upper deck, so there were tens of thousands of seats unsold, for which led to some bad PR locally from people turned away and a lot of negative pub about announcing a crowd of 36,000 as a sellout. The sustaining of a strong numbers will be based on continuation of that hype, and nobody knows that field better than a good wrestling promoter, and people enjoying themselves watching the game, which has a lot to do with presentation and atmosphere. The USFL in the 80s on ABC debuted to a 14.2 rating and had markets which drew huge crowds early before dying, and others that just died from the start but publicly resorted to papering to giving the illusion of early success. USFL started falling fast from there, and the league folded within a few years. By week 10 the USFL was down to a 4.2 before bottoming out at a 3.3 and losing primetime network coverage. It also should be noted that with all the TV stations and competition, that a 9.5 today is more impressive than a 14.2 in the 80s. There is one very significant negative to those numbers, and that is the audience declined constantly through the show with one exception, with an audience drop of 37% during the show, which is a staggering amount. The switch to the B game at 11 p.m. was the only part of the show which ever saw a very brief audience increase. No matter how that attempts to be spun, is a strong negative in that tons of people were drawn in by the hype. But with more constantly turning it off than on, the show didn't deliver in the eyes of an awful lot of viewers, which indicates that next week's numbers may be way down. The good news is even the bottom audience, when they pulled out of the boring Las Vegas-New York game, 8.1, is far beyond what the league needs to attract to be a huge hit, let alone the mid-4s the network was doing in the time slot so far this season. It was far ahead of the 5.8 in the top 49 metered markets that the Pro Bowl did the next day, or the 2.4 that the NHL All-Star Game drew, which in both cases were the best quality players in the world on one stage, as opposed to players not good enough in all but a very few cases of marginal players who fell through the cracks politically to make even an NFL practice squad. The XFL opener destroyed the Pro Bowl in every demographic group. The second game of the weekend, on UPN the next afternoon with San Francisco versus Los Angeles, drew a 3.08 rating and 6 share. From the breakdown to get 11.0 overall rating that advertisers were originally promised, which has since been scaled back to a 10.0 in some cases and maybe even 9.0, was NBC at 5.5, now scaled back to 4.5, UPN at 3.0 and TNN at 2.5. When the first week after all the hype does a 3.08 at 3.0 season average may be tough, although UPN will broadcast the rest of the games in prime time, which will help only if the novelty factor had already worn off by Sunday. Even though that game was SF versus LA, those weren't the strongest TV markets for the game, which did by far the best in Jacksonville, 8.9, Memphis, 6.2, and Norfolk, 6.2, and bombed in Cincinnati, 0.7, and Salt Lake City, 0.2. What is most interesting about the two shows is the demographics, and analyzing the league's future depends on which audience it is largely appealing to, the older, more sports-oriented football audience, or the younger pro wrestling audience. The idea was they would mix both. The NBC game drew a pro wrestling audience, with the best demo being males 12 to 17, 10.6 rating, followed by 25 to 34. Very similar to the breakdown of Raw. One survey indicated that 75% of the viewing audience for the first night considered themselves WWF wrestling fans. The young adult male demo, according to NBC, drew its best rating for a Saturday night on that network since March 24, 1990 for Golden Girls and Hunter. However, the second game's strongest audience was males 35 to 49, which is the NFL prime demographic. If the wrestling audience was the one tuning in as a novelty, and despite the polls showing wrestling fans liked it on the internet, they were also the prime audience tuning out in droves as that game went on and that didn't watch the second game. Its success may be more skewed toward what traditional sports fans want as opposed to what teenagers looking for instant gratification and pro wrestling antics want. The McMahon-oriented announcing and sketches, which is what the teenage audience was expecting with the extreme tag word, didn't appear to hold that audience's interest as the rating dropped fairly significantly, mostly over the first 90 minutes. 26% of the drop in audience was between 8:30 p.m. and 9:45 p.m. Basically enough time to sample. The UPN did not have a similar turnoff factor, as the audience stayed relatively steady in a game that ended on the last play, but also didn't draw that audience. None of the major advertisers that were going in leery about potential sleaziness of the product expressed some concern, but were overall pleased. Tony Ponturo, VP of Sports and Marketing for Anheuser-Busch, told the New York Times they walked the line carefully, but expressed concern that they need to have a better quality of play and said, "I hope they're not thinking of how to shock people in the future." The response from the media overall was very negative and often sad. Most of it was condescending, except for a lot of NBC and UPN affiliates, which have a financial stake in its success. A lot of high-profile sports writers showed they don't understand that sports fit into the entertainment world and why fans attend. Rules of games and how to cover them don't come down from Mount Olympus, and it isn't blasphemy to change them. Sports have to be marketed well and hyped tremendously or they will fail on a professional level. Sports purists who see marketing as the enemy don't understand business economics, and if a sport isn't run primarily based on business economics, whether it be the USFL or SMW or ECW, ultimately it will fail. There will be good and bad innovations, and the trick is to ditch the ones that don't work and keep the ones that do to make it a strong television product. Phil Mushnick, in a blistering negative column on February 5, did make one very strong point that may have been the saddest of all: seeing network affiliate newscasts pander to creating fake news stories to hype their own television shows and attempt to get them across as news. Both the Los Angeles and New York UPN affiliates basically have a rule to do at least one positive WWF piece for every Thursday night newscast. Economically, it makes sense to try and keep the wrestling audience on the station's biggest prime-time night of the week, but from a pure news standpoint, it is the equivalent of prostitution. Jay Mariotti of the Chicago Sun-Times had a valid point about the announcing sellouts in stadiums with an empty upper deck. But much of the criticism was unfounded. The players were often more experienced than those in NFL Europe and better than those in Canada and the Arena League. The crowds were strong. There were flaws in much of the criticism of the league, such as gratuitous violence and tawdry titillation. Leonard Shapiro, Washington Post, may have been inspired by McMahon's hyping of the product and were valid points to criticize before the first game because that is how the product was being sold. But just as the product didn't deliver on that hype, once a game is played, it can't be criticized negatively for things hyped that really weren't in the product, except when bringing up the point it didn't deliver on the hype in those aspects. You can't knock the product delivered as sleazy only because the advertising leading up to it was. There was an unfortunate media predisposed to hate this because of McMahon's shady reputation and what he was selling to draw the first rating, and criticism of both McMahon and how he sold to get the rating as valid criticism, but not because it was a league owned by a wrestling promoter, with that inherent sportswriter mindset that pro wrestling is evil because it is entertainment and not pure sport. People who dismiss the XFL making it based on quality of play, or that its first week's success shows how stupid fans are for buying second-rate football in such great numbers, don't understand the business of sports. It is not the great game or the great fight that draws, it's the hyping of that event and creating an aura around it. This was football, a popular sport, hyped well, with good marketing around a new premise. People bought out of curiosity, Because nobody knew what it was going to be. There wasn't one guy on the field who even made an NFL roster this past season, but it still greatly outdrew a game featuring the elite players in the NFL, the Pro Bowl, held the next day, and in many demos, beat the season opener of Monday Night Football. USFL also started strong as a TV product and didn't make it, but didn't have the media and fan buzz like this because it was selling football as opposed to selling entertainment wrapped around a football game. After failing big with the Olympics and with the disappointment of the NBA's falling ratings post-Michael Ebersol took the risk and saved McMahon, who would not have had anywhere this level of success or hype or been taken seriously enough with this venture by the media to hate it so much to create the curiosity without NBC being behind the product, and likely would have failed with just TNN and UPN. People who dismiss it with the weather argument people won't go to watch football in the February cold in Chicago are right if there is no hype or buzz. But people will watch a hot product in the snow without giving it a second thought, as NFL sellouts and snowstorms for decades have proven, or as people camping out in the rain for days for hot concert tickets have shown. Dismissing it with the Saturday night argument males of the age they are trying to attract are out on Saturday nights is even worse. Great television shows have drawn huge ratings on Saturday nights in the past. While nobody expects the numbers to stay at the level of the debut, a 4.5 average for the season hardly looks out of the question. It doesn't matter when something you want to see is on, you find it and watch it. When WWF was drawing a huge children's rating and on dog show night or tennis night they aired from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., while the audience dropped from normal levels, they still did huge even though kids had school the next day and people had to work the next morning. Logically, the numbers in that time period should have been small, just as when New Japan airs a big match at 3:15 a.m. nobody should watch more than a hash mark's worth. But if it's something people really want to see, they find a way to see it. If people grow to not like it and the buzz dies, it can fail, and quickly. But the press it's going to get out of this rating won't allow this to happen so quickly in a society that grabs fads like Survivor and makes them larger than life immediately, and the buzz alone takes on a life of its own. When WWF runs Raw in California, the live show starts on a Monday at 4:30 p.m., in the middle of rush hour traffic. But if the product is hot, they still sell all the tickets immediately. If this is a cold product in 5 weeks, all those negative factors could become important. If it's hot and people have fun, they are going to watch whenever it's on and brave almost any elements to be part of the atmosphere. One thing anyone who has followed wrestling has learned, that if there is something people don't want to see, there is almost nothing you can do, and no amount of advertising and exposure can be spent, see WCW 2000, to make them see it what they don't like. And if it's something people badly want to see, the weather won't keep them away. For a marginal product, the weather is an element, just as when wrestling is marginal. Bad weather can hurt a house, but when wrestling is on fire, you can, and usually do, sell out in a blizzard. WCW's first Nitro in St. Louis at the TWA Dome in 1998 drew $914,000 on one of the worst weather days in years in that city. The XFL debut proved to be exactly nothing all that extreme. It was neither the extremely bad football its critics were expecting, nor was it extremely sexual or violent or outrageous, as Vince McMahon had promised. It was an innovative approach to televising football and stretched the boundaries of some things by football standards by implementing wrestling promotional devices. Even with the rule modifications, it simply looked like football with slight modifications such as no coin toss, didn't miss it, and no kicking extra points, less predictable. Sponsors on the fence had to be happy, not just with the rating it delivered and fan enthusiasm to the product, but that it wasn't as sleazy as feared, and that the delay made almost all the swearing disappear, something the NFL can't claim. They had to be happy it wasn't scripted, at least on the field, although that had been clear for some time. It wasn't rollerball in pads and nobody got paralyzed on the fair catch rule. The fine print of it makes it almost impossible to have that killer hit that the NFL allows fair catches, because the receiver gets a 5-yard zone the defense can't enter until he catches, making a 30-yard sprint into a fixed target steadying to catch a punt, which is dangerous, is all very difficult. There was more emphasis on showing the cheerleaders, to be sure, but there were no strip teases or shower scenes, and nobody asked one of them about their sex lives with the players. It wasn't outrageous ECW high spots built into football plays. The mics everywhere did make it a slightly different experience as a novelty, but long run I'm not sure it's as big a deal as it was made out to be. Having announcers talk to the players as they were running on the field didn't seem to add a thing, as nobody had a lot to say. Interviewing a player after a fumble is going to lead to the inevitable hot-tempered player or coach getting physical with a sideline reporter, but I think McMahon expects that and wants the publicity that will bring. The halftime locker room scene in both dressing rooms the first night was a total dud. Another week like that and scripting will start creeping into the game, because no doubt there will be strong encouragement to the coaches to do a hell of a lot more with the players during the half. If that doesn't work, the next step is scripting. The argument would be that the scripting isn't actually part of the game itself. And then what about the cameras picking up coaches talking about doing a fake field goal later in the series? How hard will it be for that information to get to the other team? At that point, you have perverted the sport itself beyond rule changes. There really was nothing in the secondary game on Saturday night to greatly cross the line, but some of Jerry Lawler's comments on the cheerleaders, wide receivers and tight ends probably stretched the borders to people who have never watched wrestling, but it was still tame compared to him shrieking about puppies on Raw. But comments like that led to Lawler and Jim Ross being excoriated in USA Today by Rudy Martz, being given an F and D for their performance, and ironically Martz apparently was so predisposed to hate the announcers because they were wrestling announcers that he didn't realize they were by far the best crew of the three. The announcers were clearly encouraged to at times rip the teams, but most badly came across as shills, as they never questioned the rules and were pumping up the league to the point it became almost nauseating. Most were not good. With Jesse Ventura coming across early like a 1980s pro wrestling announcer and Ross and Lawler coming across like a pair of 2001 wrestling announcers, it did feel like listening to good wrestling announcers do football as if it was wrestling, or in the case of Bosworth, a Steve McMichael caliber wrestling announcer doing football. Still, to many, like sometimes on a good night of Raw, Ross came across as the star of the show more than any of the anonymous players. The first night, the A game, with the New York Hitmen versus Las Vegas Outlaws, wasn't that exciting of a game. The different camera angles, the micing of players and the nicknames of some players on their jerseys did make it seem like a movie about football more than a football game on television. It was new, but it was still a bad game. There were mixed reviews on Ventura and Matt Baskerville. Maybe mixed is even too kind. Ventura was as I would have figured, not particularly well prepared, great delivery, but overall he had a boring game to call and he seemed to lose his enthusiasm by the third quarter and did not come close to living up to the hype. Baskerville was nowhere near the caliber of the announcers the NFL has, but they also were working their second game. They did a practice game 2 weeks ago. But Ventura's got the name, the delivery, and the charm as well as huge regional drawing power, which makes him able to overcome his faults, but also doesn't respond well to criticism, which will no doubt become a factor if he doesn't improve on his weaknesses. Ventura was a total pros pro next to Brian Bosworth, who is nothing short of an annoying shill as he kept over and over repeating company taglines like a bad pro wrestling announcer who tries to sell you on the idea that every Monday night is the greatest Monday night of all time to the point you can't believe a word he says. Carol Groh and Dara Torres, who only proved that at least when it came to those two, Vince was right in that interview where he said he didn't want any women on the broadcast team, then went and hired two who came across as sore thumbs. Ross and Lawler had a far more exciting game to call on Saturday, but with the original plan of broadcasting it into Chicago and Orlando being changed and the plan being just to use the game for cutaways, right now it's uncertain if the B-team games will go into the local markets or, like last night, the entire country will see the A-team game, and ironically the best team they have may get very little airtime. It was covered without all the trappings of the other games such as cameras everywhere. It was a good move, but a risky one, to pull away from a dull game with the major league crew early in the fourth quarter and all the advertised gimmicks and go to the closer game, something most sports wouldn't do under the same circumstances. Instead of a different look, that game just looked like watching football, and it was also the time frame with the smallest tune-out factor, dropping 2% in audience with a switch to old time as opposed to drops of 5 to 16% every half hour with futuristic coverage, but it was that coverage that was part of the reason for the big rating to begin with. Both Sunday games, with far less viewers, went down to the wire. But even with a good game, Ross, at the wrestling hyper level as opposed to what you'd expect from football at the beginning, seemed like he was commentating on wrestling by over-pushing things. By the end, Ross' descriptive commentary made me enjoy the game a lot. An exciting game, whether it's at the high school level or the NFL level, is still an exciting game once they've got you watching. But I don't think it was just game quality that made the pro wrestling announcing team stand out greatly when the NBC show was over. Perhaps the XFL's first real quarterback controversy is going to be when the guys hired on as the B-team announcers are so far superior to the A-team featuring the league's most famous employee, Ventura. But like a midcareer, the company has no plans for outworking a main eventer with a huge name and who draws ratings. Don't expect any change to be made. It appeared the crowd was having fun. The larger-than-expected opening crowds as well as the ratings show the hype had worked. Hyping something big enough can make something seem important enough to overcome bad product delivery at the beginning, but not consistently. One would expect the ratings to drop because the hype for Week 1 was enormous, and the key to this league is the ratings, mostly the NBC number. My feeling coming out of it was positive since the fans in the stands had the attitude they were going to enjoy it no matter what, One of the big differences in WWF and WCW crowds now is that single factor. WWF fans go in with the idea they are going to have fun, and WCW fans go in with the idea for the most part that they aren't, which means the wrestlers have to perform much better to get the crowd into the show, but week 4 will start telling the real story. But then the secondary questions come up. One thing that will get annoying is the constant talk, trying to romanticize the fact the players are being paid relatively little, as if they're doing it for the love of the game. They're doing it because it's a better job in most cases than the one they have, or they're doing it hopeful it's a springboard to the NFL. You will almost never, ever hear one player turn down an offer by an NFL over being a star in the XFL, no matter how many they're playing, because they love the game. Con speeches trying to make heroes of how little the guys are guaranteed you constantly heard, not to say that approach isn't the right approach. Paul Heyman sold ECW fans that angle for years, and was convincing enough that some of the wrestlers themselves bought it. Even before the first game, the ECW analogy had been used by many regarding the league long term. Clearly, with its ripping on the much larger NFL for being the corporate league, ECW ripping on WCW and WWF for being corporate wrestling, and romanticizing itself with no corporate sponsors, and trying to sell the passion of people not making much money playing because of this love that doesn't exist in the NFL, see above, rather than the real reason, which in most cases is chasing the NFL dream of big money. The big stars they cultivate will wind up in the NFL unless the NFL considers them physically not equipped. The two small wrestlers who are great workers in ECW that got over are sometimes hit with when stars in other companies explain why they can't be real stars. The really successful innovations in production will end up in the NFL, and ultimately they'll be doing that league a big favor in the long run. 3-point play in the old ABA, which is now a staple at almost every level of basketball. If they create a true superstar, they've only got him for 1 year unless they change the salary structure with success, which is why the emphasis won't be on creating superstars as much as creating team loyalty. The Heyman approach. Heyman ultimately, at least this week, looks like he failed in the long term with this approach. But the reasons running out of money is not something either the WWF or NBC have to worry about, and unlike Heyman, who felt he needed it for his niche to be different, this league can survive with a sponsor-friendly product. When the economics weren't nearly as one-sided years ago, when Japan was still only a 3-party race, the great in-ring quality of All Japan had times when it was outdrawn by the garbage wrestling of FMW. Rock, Austin, and Undertaker did interviews cut into the shows, and Vince McMahon gave a babyface speech like he was announcer Vince introducing Steve Austin at Raw, but there weren't a ton of wrestling references. But it was so clearly a wrestling promoter trying to do pro football with the overselling announcers, trying to get over marginal hits as being killer and selling the rules, and the romanticism of the players not being well paid but they get bonus checks for winning. Players in real sports get bonuses for winning as well, as getting into the playoffs increases the salaries, and each round of the playoffs they get into increases as well, far more than $2,500 per game, but you don't hear the announcers spending any time pointing that out because to do so would be annoying. They certainly promoted the gambling angle, as promised, even asking fans in the stands if they bet on games. Well, it was Vegas and it is legal there. There is a dark side to the strong gambling angle of encouraging it. Late in the week, one very well-connected person told me exactly where and what bets certain people close to the product were making. This is not the insinuation of an actual fix, but simply of the fact that in the first week in a game with unknown teams, certain people have knowledge and can use it for economic gain, which in the long run may not be a good thing. But if people too close to the product start playing that game, problems can arise with the credibility, particularly in a sport where if a gambler has a quarterback in his pocket, they can make very safe bets, and suddenly, it has not worked entertainment, but fixed sport. Sports that have worked endlessly to keep everyone involved away from gambling still have occasional fixes. There is a reason baseball and football shy away publicly from the gambling angle and why players are punished so severely if they bet on sports. A quarterback making $45,000 per year is a far easier target to throw a key interception than one making $4.5 million, which is the main reason Vegas placed a $1,000 maximum on bets, but a clever gambler can get around that to a degree. But again, like the injury angle, the fact is if that was a strong issue, college players who are younger are more apt targets since far more money is bet on that game. The injury and insurance concerns with the game before it started, while very real issues, still would put this league ahead of the more dangerous indoor arena league play, with players who in that league are earning far less money. Some positives and negatives. Positive: cameras on the field and micing of players and hearing the coaches tell the quarterbacks the play before the play made the game more interesting as a novelty. But by the end of the game, The novelty started to wear out when you had seen enough winded players having nothing to say and annoyed coaches wanting the camera out of their faces. Negative. They kept on that camera in the first game too long into the plays, so the camera work of plays that went downfield quickly and passes came across like WCW production. Positive. The quicker time clock between plays made for what came across as a faster-paced game, even though it still lasted more than 3 hours. Negative. With the announcers either not knowing, or not saying, when plays were called what to look out for, it came across as if they were holding back important info before the play. The announcers not explaining what the plays were made me feel like I was watching WCW announcers not explain angles. Positive. Fans came to have a good time, and even in a bad game the atmosphere came across as people wanting to have fun. Negative. Fans came across as total morons. Really. This was as bad as those segments WCW used to do trying to get fans to say DDP was going to beat Goldberg. Positive. Nobody asked a cheerleader any questions about the game or who she was dating. Negative. Players trying to do wrestling interviews and that horrible 1980s wrestling pre-tape vignette of the player and the cheerleader. I was expecting Brutus the Barber to come out with giant scissors. John Stanley Hansen, who can lay the best claim of anyone to the title of being the most popular foreign wrestler in the history of Japanese wrestling, brought a crowd of about 32,000 fans to tears on January 28 with his retirement ceremony at the Tokyo Dome. Hansen, 51, was the last survivor from the All Japan glory years of the 1980s with prime-time network television, and his retirement comes in the wake of a 2-year period which saw the company's two legends from that era, promoter and icon Giant Baba, and top-in-ring performer Jumbo Tsuruta pass away. He was also the wrestler mainly responsible for popularizing the clothesline, which he called the lariat, into a finishing maneuver in the 70s, and by the mid-80s, it became probably the most imitated power move in the game. While Hansen, who holds the all-time foreign wrestler record having made 132 tours to Japan, placed a close second to Bruiser Brody in a recent ballot among active pro wrestlers in the Japan as to who the greatest foreign wrestler of all time was, much of that was due to the mystique left by Brody, who was murdered when he was still at his peak in 1988. Hansen was actually the more popular and bigger drawing card of the two in Japan when both were active headliners in the 80s except for the period immediately after Brody's jump to New Japan, and his career continued as the most popular foreign wrestler in the country right into his final year. His retirement, announced in December, was due to lumbago so severe he wasn't even able to wrestle on the show dedicated to his career. Hansen, who currently has a best-selling autobiography out in the Japanese market, was honored by numerous reporters as well as Motoko Baba, the Destroyer, Toshiaki Kawada, Lord James Blears, Mil Mascaras, New Japan's Seiji Sakaguchi, and a surprise, his best friend from his days as a New Japan headliner, British wrestling star of the 70s, Pete Roberts. Hansen's long-standing popularity was based on being a combination of several popular Japanese stereotypes and fascination. In his prime, Hansen was a very agile and aggressive 300-pounder who was constant action inside the ring, at a time when you could count on one hand the number of people who fit that description. He also fit into the Japanese fascination with cowboys from Texas from popular Western movies starring John Wayne, which during the same period also helped the popularity in Japan of people like the Funks and Murdoch. And his physique was somewhat like a sumo wrestler with a strong lower body, a sport that was symbolic of Japan, which the Japanese equated with natural power. While Hansen was known for providing great matches and being one of the great all-time brawlers, he was hardly easy to work with. With the combination of his very stiff style and being badly nearsighted, there was a joke in the early 80s about it being safer to shoot with the Iron Sheik, who had a shooter rep in those days, than to work with Stan Hansen. Earlier in the week, Hansen was honored for his career by the Japanese Professional Sports Association at their annual awards. He was also sought out at the awards dinner by Hideki Matsui of the Yomiuri Giants baseball team, who was named the Outstanding Athlete of the Year in Japanese professional sports, who asked to get his photo taken with Hansen, who he grew up watching in the 80s. He was the foreign fixture in main events from 1977, when he made his debut with New Japan and quickly became Antonio Inoki's top rival, through the late 1990s when age caught up with him in the All Japan rings. His popularity was such that long past his prime, as late as 1998 and 1999, with partners Vader and Akira Tao respectively, he went all the way to the finals on the promotion's traditional biggest tour of the year, the Tag Team Tournament, and almost never did singles jobs. Like many of the big stars of the 70s, John Stanley Hansen was first introduced to pro wrestling largely because he was a college football star at West Texas State University in Canyon, Texas, right outside of the home of the Amarillo promotion and the Funk family. Hansen was an All-Missouri Valley Conference linebacker in 1971 and was drafted by the Baltimore Colts in the NFL draft, but failed to make the team. he went. Stan Hansen. Career title history. Source: Wrestling Title History's 4th edition and Wrestling Observer Newsletter records. AWA World Heavyweight Def. Rick Martel, December 29, 1985, East Rutherford, New Jersey. Vacated title, refusing to drop title in the ring to Nick Bockwinkel, June 29, 1986, Denver. All Japan Triple Crown Heavyweight Def. Terry Gordy, June 8, 1990, Tokyo. Lost to Terry Gordy, July 17, 1990, Ishikawa, Def. Mitsuharu Misawa for vacated title, July 27, 1990, Matsudo. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta, January 19, 1991, Matsumoto, Def. Jumbo Tsuruta, January 28, 1992, Tokyo. Lost to Mitsuharu Misawa, August 22, 1992, Tokyo, Def. Toshiaki Kawada, March 4, 1995, Tokyo. Lost to Mitsuharu Misawa, May 26, 1995, Sapporo. PWF Heavyweight Def. Giant Baba, September 8, 1983, Chiba. Lost to Giant Baba, July 13, 1984, Tokyo, Def. Giant Baba, July 30, 1985, Fukuoka. Lost to Riki Choshu, April 5, 1986, Yokohama, Def. Hiroshi Wajima to win vacant title, April 24, 1987, Yokohama. Lost to Genichiro Tenryu, March 9, 1988, Yokohama, Def. Genichiro Tenryu, July 27, 1988, Nagano. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta, April 18, 1989, Tokyo. All Japan International Heavyweight Def. Jumbo Tsuruta, July 31, 1986, Tokyo. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta, October 21, 1986, Tokyo. NWA United National Heavyweight Def. Genichiro Tenryu, July 27, 1988, Nagano. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta, April 18, 1989, Tokyo. NWF World Heavyweight Def. Antonio Inoki, February 8, 1980, Tokyo. Lost to Antonio Inoki, April 3, 1980, Tokyo. WCW United States Heavyweight Def. Lex Luger, October 27, 1990, Chicago. Lost to Lex Luger, December 16, 1990, St. Louis. All Japan Double World Tag Team, with Terry Gordy Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu, July 29, 1988, Takasaki. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu, July 31, 1988, Hakodate, with Terry Gordy Def. Genichiro Tenryu and Toshiaki Kawada for vacant title in annual tag team tournament final, December 13, 1988, Tokyo. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu, February 2, 1989, Kansas City, with Genichiro Tenryu Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu, July 11, 1989, Sapporo. Vacated titles prior to 1989 tag team tournament, with Genichiro Tenryu Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu in tag team tournament final, December 6, 1989, Tokyo. Lost to Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, March 6, 1990, Tokyo, with Danny Spivey Def. Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, April 18, 1991, Tokyo. Lost to Terry Gordy and Steve Williams, June 6, 1991, Yokosuka, with Ted DiBiase Def. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao, September 3, 1993, Tokyo. Titles vacated prior to 1993 tag team tournament, with Gary Albright Def. Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao, January 24, 1996, Matsumoto. Lost to Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao, February 20, 1996, Morioka. NWA World Tag Team, with Ole Anderson won several tournaments and Def. Don Morocco and Wahoo McDaniel to be recognized as champions, February 1982, titles vacated when Hansen returned to Japan. All Japan World Tag Team, with Bruiser Brody Def. Giant Baba and Dory Funk to win tournament to create title, April 25, 1984, Yokohama. Title vacated when Brody jumped New Japan in March 1985, with Ted DiBiase Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu to win vacant titles, April 25, 1985, Tokyo. Lost to Jumbo Tsuruta and Tiger Mask. Mitsuharu Misawa, July 3, 1987, Tokyo, with Ted DiBiase Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Tiger Mask, July 11, 1987, Yonago. Hansen picks Austin Idol as new partner when DiBiase jumps to WWF in September 1987. Lost to Genichiro Tenryu and Ashura Har, September 3, 1987, Nagoya. NWA International Tag Team, with Ron Bass Def. Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta, April 12, 1983, Matsuyama. Lost to Giant Baba and Jumbo Tsuruta, April 17, 1983, Nagasaki. NWA North American Heavyweight Def. Murdoch, May 2, 1977, Tulsa. Lost to Bill Watts, June 20, 1977, Tulsa. NWA United States Tag Team, with Frank Goodish, Bruiser Brody Def. Johnny Eagles and Terry Latham October 1974, lost to Danny Hodge and Jay Clayton July 9, 1975 Fort Smith, Arkansas. NWA Georgia Heavyweight Def. Slater December 1977, lost to Mr. Wrestling 2 January 1978, Def. Mr. Wrestling 2 February 1978, vacated title to Tour Japan June 1978. NWA Georgia Tag Team, with Tommy Rich Def. Gene and Ole Anderson 1977, lost to Ole Anderson and Jacques Goulet December 13, 1977 Macon, Georgia, with Ole Anderson Def. Tommy Rich and Mr. Wrestling 2 October 27, 1978 Atlanta, vacated title when Hansen went to Japan, with Tommy Rich Def. Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff July 2, 1979 Augusta, Georgia, lost to Ole Anderson and Ivan Koloff August 31, 1979 Atlanta. CWA International Heavyweight Def. Austin Idol September 12, 1983 Louisville, lost to Austin Idol October 3, 1983 Memphis. CWA TV title Def. Tom Pritchard July 30, 1983 Memphis, title dropped. All Japan Real World Tag League Tournament. 1982, with Bruiser Brody lost to Dory and Terry Funk in finals. 1983, with Bruiser Brody Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu in finals. 1984, with Bruiser Brody lost to Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu in finals. 1985 with Ted DiBiase won tournament via points after going to 30 minutes draw with Riki Choshu and Yoshiaki Yatsu in finals. 1986, with Ted DiBiase lost to Jumbo Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu in finals. 1987, with Terry Gordy tied for second place. 1988, with Terry Gordy Def. Genichiro Tenryu and Toshiaki Kawada in finals. 1989, with Genichiro Tenryu Def. Jumbo Tsuruta and Yoshiaki Yatsu in finals. 1990, with Danny Spivey lost to Terry Gordy and Steve Williams in finals. 1991, with Danny Spivey tied for second place. 1992, with Johnny Ace tied for second place. 1993, with Giant Baba second place. 1994, with Giant Baba tied for second place. 1998, with Vader lost to Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama in finals. 1999, with Akira Tao lost to Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama in finals. All Japan Champion Carnival Tournament. 1991, lost to Jumbo Tsuruta in finals. 1992 Def. Mitsuharu Misawa in finals. 1993 Def. Mitsuharu Misawa in finals. New Japan MSG Singles Tournament. 1979, lost to Antonio Inoki in finals. 1980, lost to Antonio Inoki in finals. 1981, lost to Antonio Inoki in finals. New Japan MSG Tag Team Tournament. 1980, with Hulk Hogan lost to Antonio Inoki and Bob Backlund in finals. Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards. 1982 Tag Team of the Year, with Ole Anderson. 1985 Best Brawler. 1990 Bruiser Brody Memorial Award. 1996 Hall of Fame. Into teaching before being talked into giving pro wrestling a try. He trained alongside two other men who would go on to be two of the game's biggest stars at the time his career was climbing, Tsuruta and Bob Backlund, in 1973. Except for a brief stint playing in the Old World Football League, he spent the next 27 years in pro wrestling, almost exclusively as a top star. After early stints in prelims working the Amarillo territory and later Florida, he went into a new region fresh and got his first real push. In October of 1974, while wrestling for Leroy McGuirk in what later became Bill Watts Mid-South Territory, Hansen was first paired with Frank the Hammer Goodish, who preceded him by a few years at West Texas State, and the two captured the area's United States Tag Team title from Terry Latham and Johnny Eagles. A decade later, after Goodish became one of the biggest stars in the world as Bruiser Brody, the two formed what many people consider the greatest tag team in the history of pro wrestling. The man who inspired numerous nicknames, from Battle and Stan, to Cowboy Stan, to Stan the Man and of course Stan the Lariat, and perhaps his best-known moniker, the Bad Man from Borger, Texas, first came to Japan after leaving the McGuirk circuit with All Japan in September 1975 for $1,000 per week as a semi-final wrestler. After the tour was over, he started working out of Dallas, and was a favorite of Booker Red Bastian's, who gave him his first major singles push, feuding with the likes of the Mongolian Stomper, Peter Maivia and Rick Martel and earning $600 to $700 per week. His first career big break came in March of 1976, when he met aging veteran journeyman Mike Paidausis in the dressing room in Corpus Christi. Men who were 6'3" and more than 300 pounds and were real athletes didn't grow on trees in that era, and the WWF, which had hit a dearth of challengers for Sammartino after his lucrative program with Billy Graham had run its course and was being recycled for far too long, was known as a big man's territory. Paidausis envisioned the unknown football player as a potential challenger for Bruno Sammartino. Paidausis gave Hansen a piece of paper, which was Bruno's secret home phone number, and told him not to call Vince McMahon Sr., but to call Bruno directly and say he recommended him. Sammartino told him that Paidausis' word was good enough for him, and went to bat for Hansen immediately and had him flown in for the television tapings within a few weeks to groom him for an immediate Madison Square Garden title shot, which due to a freak occurrence, became one of the most famous matches of the era and led to what was at the time biggest gate in the history of American wrestling. Because Hansen came to the WWF with no real reputation and only a few weeks of television build-up in a rush job of trying to create a new superstar and dreaded finisher called the Lariat as a threat to Sammartino, the April 26, 1976 first meeting of the two in Madison Square Garden drew 17,493 fans, a low figure for that era. Midway through the match, in executing a simple body slam, Hansen released him early and dropped him on his head, resulting in Sammartino suffering a broken neck. Sammartino's eyes were glazed for several minutes, but in what at the time was considered an amazing physical feat, he continued to wrestle, even made a comeback, before doing the finish where Hansen hit his lariat finisher and Sammartino was bleeding badly and the match was stopped before a possible pinfall, leaving question as to whether Sammartino would have been pinned or not from the move. And then after the bell, Sammartino made yet another comeback so the fans would have hope. This, of course, was to set up the no-stopping on blood rematch set for just 3 weeks later. Sammartino collapsed in the dressing room and was hospitalized. That mistake by Hansen ended up making his career, as suddenly, he was the man who broke Sammartino's neck, which was credited to his lariat as opposed to the actual body slam several minutes earlier. The lariat thus became the most feared move in wrestling, and Hansen had more heat than any heel in the Northeastern years, to the point he couldn't eat at a restaurant without causing a scene from rabid Sammartino fans who blamed Hansen for injuring their cultural icon. Hansen was so hot that 3 weeks later, MSG was sold out in advance for his main event win over Ivan Putski, a short match with incredible heat on the first show not headlined by Sammartino in nearly 3 years. McMahon Sr. was so fearful for Hansen's safety that even though his heat was tremendous, he pulled him from anywhere except the big clubs that had great security, for fear his appearance in a smaller building with bad security would result in a riot. McMahon told Hansen to avoid even walking the streets in the Northeast alone. Sammartino, who was nowhere close to ready, was rushed back for the grudge match on June 25, 1976 at Shea Stadium, as the main drawing match for the show that was part of a worldwide closed-circuit day headlined by the Antonio Inoki vs. Muhammad Ali match. Sammartino was literally taken out of the hospital with little or no training, as Vince McMahon Sr. told him that because of all the financial promises made to Bob Arum regarding getting Ali and Chuck Wepner, who faced Andre on his same show, if the show bombed, the WWF was facing potential bankruptcy, but the Sammartino vs. Hansen match was a sure bet to save the show. The show ended up drawing 32,000 paid and destroyed all existing American records with a $450,000 house. Sammartino didn't gain his revenge, as Hansen, after starting to sell for Sammartino's comeback, walked to the dressing room and was counted out, setting up the cage match on August 7th of that year, where Sammartino finally got his full revenge before a sold-out Madison Square Garden and felt formed for the closed-circuit overflow of more than 24,000 fans. The two continued to do huge business throughout the Northeast through December, including doing 3 consecutive sellouts in both Boston and Philadelphia. McMahon Sr. booked his newly created superstar into New Japan for the first time in January of 1977. The big lore was that Inoki would face the man that broke Bruno's neck, and that guaranteed him a big NWF title match and pinfall loss to Inoki, who never did jobs in that era. But if Hansen couldn't deliver the goods, it would have been over after Inoki got the win. Instead, over the next 5 years, Hansen came to New Japan for 14 tours, including 8 NWF World Heavyweight title matches, including one for Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling promotion, with Inoki, as well as going to the finals and losing to Inoki in 3 straight MSG singles tournaments, New Japan's answer to the Champion Carnival Tour. Hansen was the only foreign wrestler in Japan ever to defeat Andre the Giant, en route to reaching the finals 1 year. During that same period, he was also the only foreign wrestler ever to score a clean pin on Hulk Hogan. Hansen's only win over Inoki during that entire period, on February 8, 1980 at the Tokyo Gym, was their most famous match, because it ended Inoki's nearly 5-year reign as NWF champion. Inoki took the rematch on April 3, 1980 at Sumo Hall to regain the title. He also did an angle that basically created the second king of the lariat in Japan and Japan's next hot singles wrestler in Riki Choshu, as after Hansen pinned Choshu in less than 1 minute with a lariat, they did the storyline that Choshu learned the move that beat him and began using the lariat as his finisher, creating a rivalry that exploded in the mid-80s when Choshu joined Hansen in jumping to All Japan. By late 1979, his pay increased to $3,500 per week, at the time top money in wrestling during that pre-wrestling wartime period, as he became the most popular foreign wrestler in the history of the promotion. In the first annual MSG Tag Team Tournament, taken from the popularity of All Japan's Real World Tag League Tournament that started in 1977, Hansen and Hogan, who had become a regular tag team, lost in the finals to the Dream Team of NWF champion Inoki and WWF champion Backlund. But even more famous than any of his singles matches with Inoki was his match on September 23, 1981 at the Dinan Coliseum in Tokyo, before a sellout 13,500 fans, where he went to a double countout with Andre in what is generally considered the greatest singles match Andre was ever involved in. In between Japan tours over the next few years, Hansen went back to work for McGurk, capturing the North American title, before a several-year period where in between his New Japan tours, he worked for Jim Barnett in Atlanta as a consistent headliner when Georgia Championship Wrestling was first starting to get its national following as WTCG, now TBS, started being added to cable systems around the country. During that same period, he had a brief run in the WWF with 3 sellouts in Madison Square Garden against champion Bob Backlund, doing the double blood stoppage on February 16, 1981. The countout win for Hansen on March 16, 1981, leading to the cage match where Backlund walked out the door to win on April 6, 1981, which saw them have to open the felt form for the overflow. He also worked a Boston and Pittsburgh program culminating in cage matches, and Sammartino, which was Sammartino's last real program before his retirement later that year. But probably the key moment in Hansen's career, even more than the lucky break in the Sammartino match, had already taken place months before the Andre match. All Japan and New Japan, while rival promotions, had an informal rule that neither side would take the other's talent, as a way to keep costs down and avoid the bidding war which both felt would threaten each side's business. New Japan broke the rule in May of 1981 when they convinced Abdullah the Butcher to switch sides by offering him an unheard of $8,000 per week, double what the top money was for foreigners in Japan of that era. Hansen was worried that with that kind of financial commitment, that Butcher was guaranteed the top spot, a feeling also held by another of New Japan's top foreigners, Tiger Jeet Singh. Hisashi Shinma, who handled the business for New Japan, told Hansen that they were committed to putting All Japan out of business and signing Butcher was a huge move in that direction, but told Hansen that he'd give him a raise to $4,000 per week, and that because Butcher was so heavy, he probably was only going to be able to wrestle a few more years, so the company was going to keep Hansen strong because in the long run he'd still have to be the top guy. When Hansen got back to Georgia in June, he received a phone call from Terry Funk, the All Japan booker, to set up a secret meeting with Baba in Dallas. Baba offered Hansen a deal for $8,000 per week to make the jump as a surprise after his New Japan contract ended at the end of the tag team tournament in December. Hansen largely kept it a secret, asking only Brody, his best friend at the time, who was already an All Japan headliner, and Andre, for advice on what to do. Both recommended he make the jump. This set up one of the most memorable moments in Japanese wrestling history. New Japan ended its tag team tournament on December 11, 1981 in Osaka, where Hansen and Murdoch tied with Inoki and Tatsumi Fujinami for second place but lost a playoff match for the finals, which were won by Andre and Rene Goulet. Hansen was brought back to the Keio Plaza Hotel in Tokyo, the New Japan headquarters, before his scheduled flight home from Narita Airport. He secretly checked out of the hotel at about 3 a.m. that night and went to a different hotel, where he checked in under an assumed identity, and in the room waiting for him was All Japan referee and road agent Joe Higuchi, Brody, Jimmy Snuka and Shohei and Motoko Baba, where they went over the plan for the tag team tournament finals on December 13, 1981 at Budokan Hall, which had come down to the Funks versus Brody and Snuka. The plan was laid out that Hansen would come to the ring with Brody and Snuka, and then in the closing moments of the match, he would lariat Terry Funk, taking him out of the match, and eventually Dory on his own, would be double-teamed and pinned by Brody. After the match would be a wild scene where both Baba and Tsuruta would attack Hansen. And that's what happened. The scenes of Hansen, in his jeans and cowboy hat, first walking to the ring with Brody and Snuka, and later delivering the lariat to Terry outside the ring with streamers everywhere from Japanese fans popping a nut, and later of Baba and Hansen trading punches and chops, were replayed for decades, leading that match to finish high for more than a decade on lists of the greatest match in Japanese wrestling history. At about this point in time, the feeling from NTV, the network which owned the majority of stock in All Japan at the time, that it was time to make the move since Baba was getting up in years and was past his prime, to Tsuruta as the top star. Hansen debuted with super fanfare on January 15, 1982, destroying Ashurahara in 254 with the lariat to set up the first meeting ever with Baba on February 4, which was a wild double disqualification in the days when All Japan's typical big match finish was inconclusive, a practice that stayed until the UWF promotion set Japan on fire with all clean finishes, and Baba did a 180-degree philosophical change around 1990 that many credit with his company's huge success in the early part of that decade. Hansen's aggressiveness, work rate and popularity by this point were so top-notch that after the first Baba-Hansen singles match drew such a huge television rating, the Hansen feud was able to keep Baba as a strong draw as a main event headliner for another 4 years before he stepped down. This was the period of the original Miracle Power combination, Hansen and Brody, as the unstoppable force in All Japan in matches mainly against Baba and Tsuruta and the Funks. The two became easily the most popular foreign tag team ever in Japan, and were given the new World Tag Team title belts in a 4-team tournament in April of 1984 over Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell, Dory Funk and Baba and Tsuruta and Genichiro Tenryu, as well as being finalists every year in the tag team tournament in December. The duo never lost the belts, nor did they ever lose a match cleanly in Japan. Their few losses, including in the tag tourney finals, were all via DQ, breaking up when Brody jumped to New Japan in March of 1985, and Hansen picked Ted DiBiase as his new partner. Hansen was involved in one of the stranger stories when he started working the AWA as a headliner between tours. On December 29, 1985 at the Meadowlands, Hansen used the Boston Crab to capture the AWA title from Martel, which he defended in both Japan and the United States. He also held the PWF title at the same time, making him a rare double champion. The actual first Triple Crown match in history, which is long forgotten, was on March 29, 1986 with Hansen defending the AWA and PWF titles and Jumbo Tsuruta defending the international title, which ended in the double count-out. While he lost the PWF belt via DQ to Choshu, he continued to hold the AWA title. On his last show before leaving for Japan, where he was scheduled for some title defenses, in particular a big show on July 31, 1986 at Sumo Hall, which was an AWA title versus international title unification rematch against Tsuruta, Vern Gagne asked him to drop the title in Denver on June 29, 1986 to Nick Bockwinkel. Since Hansen's main business was Japan and he felt the belt loss, which Baba had paid money for the rights to have the champ work and defend in Japan, and was already promoting the Sumo Hall show, was an attempt to double-cross Baba. He refused, and walked out of the building taking the belt with him. The AWA simply announced Hansen was afraid of Bockwinkel and gave Bockwinkel a new belt. Hansen worked the tour with the belt and pinned Tsuruta to theoretically unify the titles to the Japanese audience. Hansen, as international champion, then announced he was vacating the less prestigious AWA title. After losing it back to Tsuruta, Hansen pinned sumo legend Hiroshi Wajima on April 24, 1987 to win the PWF title that Choshu vacated when he jumped back to New Japan, lost it to Tenryu in a PWF vs. United National title unification match on March 9, 1988 in Nagano, and then on July 27, 1988 pinned Tenryu to win both titles back. When Brody finally returned to All Japan in 1987, the idea was to build to a dream match between the two. It started with their only physical meeting ever in Japan in November of 1987 at Korakuen Hall, where Brody and Snuka wrestled Hansen and new partner Terry Gordy to a double count-out. The dream match on August 29, 1988 at Budokan Hall never took place, as Brody was stabbed to death by Jose Gonzalez, Invader I, in the dressing room in Bayamon, Puerto Rico 6 weeks earlier. The creation of the Triple Crown title was on April 18, 1989 in Tokyo when Hansen, the PWF and United National champ, lost to Tsuruta, the international champ. After winning it for the first time over Terry Gordy on June 8, 1990 underneath the first famous Tsuruta vs. Misawa main event, Hansen dominated the Triple Crown over the next 5 years, winning it 4 times. Hansen remained the top foreign fixture, as the perennial cleanup hitter and home run champion in the All Japan batting order, during both the good and bad times. On February 10, 1990 at New Japan's first sellout at the Tokyo Dome of 63,900, one of the top matches was Hansen vs. Vader at a time when All Japan and New Japan were cooperating for a few months. The match was memorable for a potato shot by Hansen, which nearly cost Vader the sight in one of his eyes, and the memories of the match helped make the Vader and Hansen tag team into something special when Vader finally came to All Japan in late 1998. The eye swelled so large that Vader unmasked in one of the most memorable scenes of that era. A few months later, at the Japan Wrestling Summit on April 13, 1990 at the Tokyo Dome before 53,742 fans, he practically saved the show when at the last minute Terry Gordy refused to do the job for Hulk Hogan in the main event, feeling it was wrong for someone who made his living in Japan to put over clean a wrestler who made his living elsewhere. WWF's only demands on the show when it came to interpromotional matches were that Hogan and Ultimate Warrior go over. They allowed Randy Savage, their third biggest star, to lose clean to Tenryu, and for their top tag team of the era, Demolition, to job to Baba and Andre. Hansen volunteered, and had one of Hogan's better matches ever, and put him over clean. Ironically, Hansen became more popular among the Japanese fans because he was a bigger star than Gordy, and everyone knew the logic was that Hansen should beat Hogan in Japan, but in putting Hogan over, he put the show ahead of logic to appease the businessmen from America who didn't understand, and the switch not only led to a huge walk-up, but saved the show. Because he stayed loyal to All Japan, Hansen never went back to the WWF and rarely worked the U. After this point, except for a late 1990 run in World Championship Wrestling where he won and lost the U title in matches with Lex Luger, and later worked a WCW program against Vader, which went nowhere since neither man could do a finish due to Japanese politics. When the promotion caught fire in 1990 during the ascension of Mitsuharu Misawa, it was Hansen who became the one man in the company Misawa could never beat until Misawa gained his first win in the Triple Crown title from Hansen on August 22, 1992 at Budokan Hall. Hansen's role changed at this point, but he remained an effective headliner, taking the role Terry Funk popularized several years earlier when he had his singles feud with Hansen, as the aging legend who was taking a beating against younger and faster opponents, but always hung on, and when you were sure they were beaten, pulled victory from the jaws of defeat with his famed Desperation Lariat finish as a sympathetic character. This Hansen remained effective, as fans patiently paid and waited for the day when the younger stars like Toshiaki Kawada and Kenta Kobashi would finally get to the level where they could beat anyone on any given day if they could score the elusive pin on Hansen. Hansen's last great singles run came in 1995 with his final Triple Crown win, while he briefly held the tag team titles in 1996 with Gary Albright, and was revitalized in late 1998 with the attempt to put together a new Miracle Power combination with Vader. He was mainly the aging veteran who was kept strong out of respect for his reputation, but rarely put in a top singles position. His body was shot, the effect of all those years working the punishing All Japan style, and the end was foreshadowed when, for the first time since joining the company, he wasn't booked for the tag team tournament after his lower back problems in October had gotten so bad he had to miss many matches. What turned out to be the final match of his career, without any fanfare, and he was so crippled up he could barely do anything, was on October 28 at Budokan Hall in a mid-card match teaming with Steve Williams and Wolf Hotfield, losing to Masafuchi and Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Johnny Smith. On November 19, it was announced that the Tokyo Dome show would feature his retirement ceremony, and later revealed he wouldn't even wrestle on the show. Extreme Championship Wrestling, facing some $7 million in debts, needs almost a miracle at this point to keep from closing down imminently. Although the WWF policy 2 weeks ago was to not sign any ECW talent and to give Paul Heyman a chance to sell the company or make a television deal, that changed 1 week ago to signing talent with the belief ECW was going down, and making sure the talent didn't go en masse to WCW, where an ECW invasion angle could make for a potential strong program. Last week's idea was to sign talent, but not announce it publicly so as not to hurt any negotiations Heyman had. But by the end of the week, WWF itself reported what had become fairly common knowledge, that Pete Polacco, just incredible, had signed, and they had reached verbal deals with Jerry Lynn and Terry Guerin, Rhino. Even more strange was that in the Ross report, Jim Ross positioned it as if ECW fans were clamoring for Heyman to join the WWF, where he has been offered a job writing television, even making the comment he's willing to drink the Kool-Aid, but Heyman has to accept the offer to join the company first. The Kool-Aid is an inside industry remark, believed to be created by Jim Cornette, and not meant the slightest bit complimentary, for Heyman's ability at being able to fabricate and manipulate and have people buy ridiculous stories. Yoshihiro Tajiri's name was not mentioned in the report because at press time, the WWF had not offered him a contract, although it is believed that he will wind up with the company as they are negotiating through Victor Quiñones, Tajiri's agent, who also has a long-standing working relationship with his IWA territory. No matter what happened with ECW, Polacco and Lynn had little choice, as both were in terrible financial straits due to being so far behind on being paid since ECW fell into financial disarray and needed a paycheck immediately. It is believed both were offered a $100,000 downside guarantee and a 3-year contract, giving the WWF an option for a 4th year, guaranteed income largely along the same lines as their ECW contract. There may have been a small signing bonus thrown in to help them clear up their major debts. Although there have been stories that Polacco would be used as a tag team partner for Sean Waltman and that Heyman had given WWF his blessing to use the credible name, the former doesn't appear to be a working plan and the latter is true and an option, but indications are they would give him a new character. Heyman has potential deals in discussion form, but timing is now of the essence and none are anywhere close to done. There is also a matter of how long creditors can be staved off before declaring bankruptcy. There have been networks that have offered to put the show on the air, but none willing to pay what Heyman estimates is $115,000 per week in television production costs to keep the company competitive in a high-priced market. Any deal offering significantly less money, he believes, is ultimately doomed just to increase the losses. There has been nothing new said about a March 11th pay-per-view. If the company is still alive at that time and there is a cash influx from an outside source, there could still be a show, and WWF will allow ECW to use talent that had appeared with the company in the past to have a name-value lineup for a show that would likely have a Rhino versus Rob Van Dam for the ECW title as the main event, provided Van Dam isn't signed up elsewhere before that point in time. Super Crazy, who the WWF didn't pursue, is expected to attend the February 12th Nitro in Biloxi, Mississippi. With the exception of Kid Cash, which WCW has expressed at least some interest in, and perhaps Spike Dudley, who the WWF could use as a Dudley to get pounded on to set up the other Dudleys having new programs set up, there doesn't seem to be major promotion interest in the rest of the crew. For January 29th, which was the highest night of pro wrestling viewership of the season, largely due to the weaker competition this time of the year, here, in comparing the head-to-head hours, are the audiences in every age group and the breakdown. Total viewers, 9,529,000, 68 to 32 WWF women 18 to 24, 410,000, 83 to 17 WWF women 25 to 54, 1,678,000, 66 to 34 WWF women 55 plus, 407,000, 66 to 34 WWF men 18 to 24, 913,000, 74 to 26 WWF men 25 to 54, 2,860,000, 58 to 42 WWF men 55 plus, 703,000, 53 to 47 WCW teenagers, 1,544,000, 86 to 14 WWF children, 1,014,000, 74 to 26 WWF. Regarding recent trend changes, the biggest thing, and not surprisingly given the nature of the writing, is that WWF is picking up major ground among women. Even as late as November 13th, the last time we analyzed these numbers, WCW was still winning, and substantially, among older women, grandma's favorite wrestling, and now WWF has nearly doubled WCW in that demo, which is a scary turnaround for a group that WCW has always owned no matter how bad things got. As compared with that period, WCW is catching up among children, but still getting beaten 3-1. WWF has strengthened its huge lead among teenagers. Among women 18 to 24, the numbers are identical to what they were a few months back, but Raw has slightly gained among women 25 to 54, so the only real significant difference in Mr. McMahon's divorce and fling with Trish are the women in Vince's own age bracket. For men 18 to 24, the numbers have remained in a similar range, but WCW has picked up steam over the past 11 weeks, noticeably in men 25 to 54, and men 55 plus is pretty much the same. Head-to-head, Raw drew a 3.13 people meter rating to Nitro's 1.45, which basically means 1 out of every 32 people that get TNN watched Raw in that hour, while 1 in every 69 people who get TNT watched Nitro. Raw's best demos for the head-to-head hour are males 18 to 34, 6.46, and teenagers, 7.39. The losses in children watching Raw are significant from its heyday of 1 year ago, but the show is staying strong with adults. The show actually does almost as well among adult women, and much better among young adult women 18-49 with a 2.82, than it does among children, 2.50. What the McMahons used to say publicly 1 and 2 years ago, which wasn't the case at the time, that 70% of their viewers were adults, is finally, now, the truth. Nitro's audience on the other hand is 85% adults. Nitro's best demos for the head-to-head hour are also males 18 to 34, 2.62, but their weakest demo is children 0.85. For no explicable reason other than maybe show quality, both Raw and Nitro declined on February 5th. Raw did a 5.05 rating, 4.60 first hour, 5.44 second hour, and a 7.6 share. Nitro did a 2.34 rating, 2.62 first hour, 2.07 second hour, and a 3.3 share. The combined audience for the two shows was 8.0 million, a staggeringly low figure during off-football season. In fact, with the exception of July 4th weekend of last year, it was the lowest audience to watch pro wrestling on a competitive Monday night without football since the start of the boom period. The Raw main event of Austin and Triple H vs. Angle and Rock in the old Lucha Parejas Increíbles gimmick did a 5.71 overrun, which was the second highest rated match of the night even with the 4 top draws all involved. Nitro main event of Scott Steiner vs. Nash and Rick Steiner did a 2.27. Highest rated match of the night was Dudley's vs. Undertaker and Kane at 5.75, and Cat threatening to strip. Head-to-head segment saw Raw at 3.85, Jericho vs. Matt Hardy to 2.30, Steiner vs. DDP ending Mysterio Jr. vs. Guerrero Jr., Raw at 4.81, Rock, Triple H, Stephanie, Angle and Vince interviewed 1.83, Palumbo and O'Hare vs. Awesome and Storm, Raw at 4.89, Edge and Christian vs. Kaientai to 1.87, Bagwell vs. Adams, and Raw at 4.83, Vince and Stephanie confrontation with Regal, Cat Flash's APA, Dudley's vs. Undertaker and Kane start to 2.27, Scott vs. Rick and Nash. For February 1st, which was one of the most competitive nights not just for wrestling but for television of the season, SmackDown dropped to a 4.04 rating off hours of 3.5 and 4.5. It was placed fourth among the 6 networks, dropping nearly a full point from last week against the powerhouse Survivor, 17.3, and Friends 14.2. 2 episodes of Charmed on WB also went head-to-head, with the second episode, the one that featured Bagwell, Booker T and Scott Steiner, doing a 3.8. A&E also ran 2 hours of wrestling with a rerun of the Hulk Hogan biography doing a 1.0 and the Joan London behind closed doors look at WCW and the Power Plant, which was said to have been lame, doing in 0.6. Thunder on January 31st drew a 2.16 rating and 3.2 share. Weekend numbers for February 3rd to 4th saw Livewire at 1.2, Superstars at 1.2 and Heat at a 1.90 rating and 3.0 share. Television Lucha Libre on January 30th drew a 1.2 Hispanic rating, but did a 2.4 rating in males 18 to 34. IATA poll results. Results of the daily poll on the IATA.com website. New questions will be up every day at approximately 3 p.m. Eastern Time, with the results being announced at the Star of the Wrestling Observer live internet audio show the following day as well as each week here. Regarding the current WWF television product, how would you categorize your thoughts? A. It's better than ever 1.9%. B. Product is good, but it's been better before 33.5%. C. Product is watchable 30.1%. E. Showing major problems 26.7%. No longer enjoy the product 7.8%. For the week of January 22nd to 23rd, did you think? A. Raw was better 42.4%. B. Nitro was better 12.6%. C. Didn't watch Raw 4.0%. D. Didn't watch Nitro 30.5%. E. Didn't watch Raw or Nitro 10.6%. Who would be your pick for 2000 Wrestler of the Year? A. Triple H 53.2%. B. Toshiaki Kawada 7.5%. C. Rock 11.8%. E. Kazushi Sakuraba 4.8%. E. Kurt Angle 22.6%. Who would be your pick for 2000 Most Outstanding Wrestler? A. Chris Benoit 49.8%. B. Toshiaki Kawada 5.8%. C. Triple H 25.7%. D. Jun Akiyama 0.8%. Yoshihiro Tajiri 17.8%. A. Triple H vs. Mick Foley 60.4%. B. Triple H vs. Rock 19.8%. C. Hashimoto vs. Ogawa 1.0%. D. All Japan vs. New Japan 5.0%. Kazushi Sakuraba vs. Gracie's 13.9%. What did you think about Monday night's January 29th wrestling? A. Raw was better 38.1%. B. Nitro was better 23.4%. C. Didn't watch Raw 3.0%. D. Didn't watch Nitro 23.4%. E. Didn't watch Raw or Nitro 12.2%. What do you think the opening rating for the XFL on NBC will be? A. Under 4.49 21.4%. B. 4.50 to 5.49 29.9%. C. 5.50 to 6.49 25.8%. D. 6.50 to 7.49 11.0%. E. Greater than 7.50 11.0%. What was the best match for January? A. Young Dragons vs Noble and Karagias, Sin pay-per-view 10.2%. B. Kawada vs Sasaki Tokyo Dome 3.5%. C. Kawada vs Tenzan Tokyo Dome 1.3%. D. Benoit vs Jericho Royal Rumble 72.1%. E. Austin vs Angle Raw 12.8%. What are your feelings about the future of WCW? A. Very optimistic 8.3%. B. Cautiously optimistic 32.9%. C. No strong feelings 18.1%. D. Pessimistic 25.0%. E. They have no chance 15.7%. What did you think of the XFL debut on NBC? A. Thumbs up 52.6%. B. Thumbs down 6.0%. C. Thumbs in the middle 30.7%. D. Didn't see the show 10.7%. For back issues of The Observer, the Wrestling Observer Index lists almost every issue in our history going back more than 18 years with the major headlines by the week. Besides as a guide for ordering back issues, the index is also a great way to keep a catalog of past issues in use for historical purposes. It is available for $15 from Grandswarich, 151 Hart Avenue, Peterborough, Ontario K9J5C5 Canada. Virtually every back issue from 1982-91 is available from him at prices listed plus $5 for postage for overseas orders. Most issues from 1992 present are available from us at $4 per issue. If you are ordering back issues from us, please denote back issues on the envelope to ensure the quickest response. All payments to Grant or to us must be made in U.S. funds. The index has been newly updated through the end of 2000, and for anyone who has previously ordered an index, you can get a 2000 supplement free with any order of $20 or more, or for $5 for those just wanting to update the collection having saved the issues. We are also working with Powerbomb Publishing, www.powerbomb.com, to have reissues of some of the most popular Wrestling Observer publications of the past. We have the 200-page book tributes, featuring life stories on Andre the Giant Bruiser Brody, Junkyard Dog Brian Pillman, Louis Piccoli, The Bruiser, Buddy Rogers, Kerry Von Erich, Fritz Von Erich, Boris Malenko, Art Barr, Eddie Gilbert, John Studd, Ray Stevens, Murdoch, Jerry Graham and others for $25. We have 1987, 1988, 1989 and 1990 Observer yearbooks for $15. We have 1983, 1984, and 1986 Observer yearbooks for $12. We also have the 1986 Wrestling Observer's Who's Who in Wrestling book for $20. For each order, add $4 for postage and handling within North America, $6 for surface mail worldwide, or $14 for airmail overseas. If you are ordering more than one book, you only need to add $1 extra postage per additional book. All payments should be made to Powerbomb at P.O. Box 1523, Harborough, North Carolina 27510. Wrestling Observer Live airs every Monday through Friday on the ayata.com sports channel on the internet from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific Time. The show is available live throughout the world, and the most recent show is available 24 hours per day on archives to listen to at your convenience. Brian Alvarez and I open the show every day running down the latest news. We either have guests the remainder of the show taking listeners' phone calls and emails, or we take calls and emails. Even if you don't have access to a computer and just want to talk wrestling, you can reach us between those hours within North America at 1-877-392-3299, 1-877-AYATA-99. You can always email questions for the show 24 hours a day to us at davemeltzer@ayata.com. You can always check the WrestlingObserver.com website for the latest guest information. We're also on almost every Saturday night on Talk 6:40 a.m. in Toronto for Wrestling Observer Extra as part of the live audio wrestling at about 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, reviewing the news of the past week, and on Sunday nights at midnight Eastern Time, usually reviewing the pay-per-view shows and weekend news. Mexico. Lots of rumors and reports going around regarding the Televisa show, which also airs on Galavision in the United States. There was an internet report that CMLL would be losing television, but they are claiming that isn't the case. At this point, the CMLL March pay-per-view in Mexico will likely air in selected American markets as well, which would be the first pay-per-view show in the United States to ever come from Mexico, when Worlds Collide came from Los Angeles. This week's Perro Aguayo news. Now he's saying he wants to wrestle through April and end his career with a hair versus mask match against Universo 2000 at Arena Mexico. His EMLL contract expires in April, which explains that statement. Now we'll see if he jumps back to AAA for yet another retirement tour. Aguayo beat longtime rival Mascara Ano 2000 on February 2nd in Tijuana in a hair versus hair main event before another nearly packed house, which Aguayo claimed would be his final match ever in Tijuana. Of course, at this point, after years of retirement matches and clearly wearing out his welcome, that means about as much as Terry Funk. Aguayo bled heavy and Universo 2000 interfered, giving him a low blow, and his brother scored the pin. Crowd was furious, and Aguayo's second, Rey Mysterio Jr., told the ref what happened, and the ref reversed his decision and raised Aguayo's hand and resulted in a head shaving. Semi saw Juventud Guerrera and Dandy and Misterioso over Rey Jr. and La Parca and Lizmark Jr. when Guerrera pinned Mysterio Jr. in the third fall with a power bomb and his feet on the ropes. La Afición finally on February 4th ran a story about Rito Romero, saying his death was on January 17th and listed his birthday of March 19, 1927, which would have made him 72. The story claimed that Romero defeated Luthez to become NWA World Heavyweight Champion, which of course is not true, although they did once wrestle to a 60 minutes draw. He did wrestle in Los Angeles, but had an enemy in the office and never did as well as in Texas. He also worked in such places as New York, France, Egypt, and all over Europe. Thez rated him as being one of the best Mexican wrestlers he ever came across. He supposedly retired from wrestling in the early 60s after suffering a broken leg in a Houston match with the Destroyer. He suffered appendicitis on January 16th and had surgery. It was said he refused to stay in bed at the hospital the day after surgery and walked out. 5 hospital workers tried to keep him from leaving and in the struggle suffered a fatal heart attack. On the February 2nd Arena Mexico show, on top, Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje and Emilio Charles Jr. beat Negro Casas and Atlantis and Villano 3 when Charles pinned Casas with a low blow. Clearly they are building toward a hair versus hair match between the two. Semifinal saw El Satanico and Fuerza Guerrera and Black Warrior beat Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero and Record Latino in a Rudos battle, feuding over the rights to use the Infernales name. Satanico was part of the original Infernales in the 70s with Pirata Morgan and MS1. He formed the new trio with Guerrero and Bucanero, who is the nephew of Morgan, and then they turned on him. There is talk of bringing in MS1 to team with Satanico against Guerrero and Bucanero. February 16th in Tijuana is a big show headlined by a 3-way dance with Santo vs. Nicho, Psicosis vs. Mysterio Jr., plus Damien and Halloween and Mysterio Sr. vs. Shocker and Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje. They held a one-night tag team tournament on February 4th at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City, which ended with Olympico and Negro Casas beating CMLL tag champs Rey Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero in the finals, which sets up a tag title match on February 11th in the same building. On the show they did a moment of silence for Rito Romero. It was very strange since he died a few weeks back. But news of the death didn't hit until a few days ago. We actually had it in the Observer before news really hit Mexico City, and then when it hit, it was a big deal news story. On February 5th they also ran Arena Coliseo with another tournament, the Copa Ovaciones Tag Team Tournament, 2 tag team tournaments in the same building on successive nights, which came down to Felino and Fuerza Guerrera beating Super Parca and Mascara Ano 2000 via DQ. All teams consisted of a face and heel, and the winning team would then have singles match to determine who wins the cup. Felino made Guerrera submit to an upside-down figure 4. Juventud Guerrera starts February 9th at Arena Mexico and will work a program with Felino going into the pay-per-view. There may be a push to bring more talent to Arena Mexico over the next few months. Paco Alonso is pushing hard for Psicosis to come in. All Japan. The March 3 Yokohama Bunka Gym show, which ends the next tour, will be headlined by Genichiro Tenryu vs Taiyo Kiya for the Triple Crown. The big angle they are pushing is that Kiya is only 25, and the youngest man ever to win the Triple Crown was Misawa when he was 29. Sabu and Rob Van Dam were announced and given matches for every show, starting on February 18 at Korakuen Hall, using working low-card matches. While Sabu hasn't looked good of late, the idea that Van Dam would be in the second match of the card every night given the lack of talent in the company is perplexing. They even have Kim Duke in some main events, unless they aren't certain he's coming, or more likely just figure the other guys are with the company over the long haul, and obviously Van Dam is going to wind up with the U promotion soon enough. On March 2 in Osaka, Van Dam and Dan Crawford face Kimala 2 and Sabu, while Van Dam and Sabu have a singles match at the Yokohama show on March 3. Van Dam and Sabu are also working together as a tag team on several shows. They are doing a tournament with Nobutaka Araya, Shigeo Okamura, Masahito Kakihara, Mitsuya Nagai, Jim Steele and George Hines on this tour, with the tournament winner getting a berth in the Champion Carnival tournament on the next tour. Van Dam is working a lot of shows against Toryuman wrestlers Yasushi Kanda and Susumu Mochizuki and Darkness Dragon. The Taiyo Kiya and Johnny Smith tag title defense against December tournament winners Steve Williams and Mike Rotundo will be February 24 in Fukuoka. I know everyone knocks Mil Mascaras, and deservedly so, but seeing the photos from the January 28 Dome show, one has to respect that at age 62, he physically could pass for someone in his late 30s, and that it's really impressive to see a man of his age do a majestic-looking plancha to the floor. They're teasing the idea of a Kiya and Muto tag team as an interpromotional deal for Muto to give Kiya, who is the company's brightest young wrestler, a rub. Pro Wrestling Noah. Kenta Kobashi's doctor recommended that if he returns to wrestling he needs to drop a lot of weight to push less stress on his knees, wanting him to drop down to around 220 pounds. Kobashi weighed 264 when he went in for surgery and is now around 250. The new tour is February 10th to February 25th, and it's going to be tough without Kobashi. Vader, who was originally getting the tour off, will be working it, probably because of Kobashi being out. The big show of the tour on February 25th in Kobe looks weak on paper, with Misawa and Takeshi Rikyo vs Takao Mori and Yoshihiro Takayama, Akira Tao vs Jun Akiyama and Masashi Aoyagi, and 2 Cold Scorpio vs Akitoshi Saito and Takashi Sugawara on top. New Japan. The traditional 2 dates in a row in Sapporo had to be a disappointment at the gate, as they drew 7,200 and 6,500 fans respectively on February 3 and February 4 in the 10,000-seat Doritsu Gym, with the big angle being the breakup of Team 2000 to add Masahiro Chono vs Don Frye on the February 18 pay-per-view show from Sumo Hall. The first night they headlined with an All Japan vs New Japan match where Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi and Takashi Iizuka beat Masa Fuchi and Nobutaka Araya and Toshiaki Kawada in 23-22 when Nakanishi used the torture rack on Araya. After the match, Nakanishi went on the PA and challenged Kawada to a singles match. While the match was diluted by being a 6-man and Araya not being main event caliber, it also shows how much the legs in the feud have weakened, especially since Keiji Muto and Masahiro Chono worked the show. In a battle of banged-up wrestlers, Muto and Shinjiro Otani, being the monster push finally, since he's main eventing the February 18 pay-per-view show against Kensuke Sasaki for the IWGP Heavyweight title, beat Chono and Frye in what appears to be the start of the Chono vs Frye split when Muto pinned Chono after Frye accidentally hit him with a punch. Chono, besides his bad neck, was working with taped-up ribs from his January 4 match with Sasaki. Frye was working with a torn left thigh and in a lot of pain as well. Frye and Chono were about to go at it until Satoshi Kojima and Hiroyoshi Tenzan hit the ring to pull them apart, and Frye walked out. The belief is that Frye and Otani are going to form a regular tag team to feud with Team 2000, which is a good pairing since Otani is such an awesome worker and Frye's UFC champion gimmick is now a rep more than 3 years old, so he can't get by simply on his background any longer, and his work in the ring is only passable. Chono did the show since it was a major market and had to do the angle for the pay-per-view, but inflamed his ribs in the match and will be out of action for a while. They want him back for February 11 in Osaka, but it's more likely he'll be held out until the pay-per-view. Minoru Tanaka and Koji Kanemoto retained the junior tag titles over Silver King and Dr. Wagner Jr., who are brothers, when Kanemoto pinned Silver King after a moonsault in 1955 in a match said to have good wrestling but not much heat because Silver King isn't over a lick to New Japan fans. In a Legends-type battle, Tatsumi Fujinami beat Yoshiaki Fujiwara. Fujinami, after the match, basically said this match stunk and said he wasn't in condition and wouldn't wrestle again until he got in condition. The other major match was a non-title bout as tag champs Kojima and Tenzan beat Jushin Liger and Sasaki when Kojima pinned Liger after a lariat. The next night they drew even less, even with Choshu wrestling in Sapporo for the first time in years. They are using Choshu right now in an attempt to give Kenzo Suzuki, who they want to push, a rub, but Suzuki is so ridiculously far from ready. They beat Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto in a match where Suzuki basically worked the entire match until hot tagging Choshu, who hit 2 lariats and a scorpion and got an immediate win. They teased something for the future as right before the finish, Suzuki accidentally speared Choshu. Liger did another job as a heavyweight in a tag match teaming with Super Strong Machine, losing to Sasaki and Nagata. Muto pinned Iizuka and Kojima, and Tenzan in a very weak on-paper main event kept the titles over Nakanishi and Osamu Nishimura in 25-29 when Tenzan pinned Nishimura after a pile driver. Nishimura in that position on a big show doesn't come close to cutting it. Fry and Otani and Sledgehammer, Jason Anderson from Calgary, will be headlining shows this tour on February 12th in Okayama against Yutaka Yoshi and Nagata and Nakanishi, and on February 15th in Koshigaya against Liger and Nagata and Sasaki. On February 14th in Gifu, Otani and Fry face Bryan Johnston and Nagata. January 20th TV show was more from the January 4th Tokyo Dome. They opened the show with footage of Nakanishi's wedding, which is actually traditional in Japan when a major star gets married to have this huge wedding and put it on television. In a non-title match, Tanaka and Kanemoto beat Shinya Makabe and Tatsuhito Takaiwa. The work was excellent in this match and it was totally devoid of heat. Crowd Live treated this as intermission, and junior heavyweights traditionally don't play well at the Dome. Lots of stiff kicks to the chest and leg by Kanemoto and Tanaka. Hard slaps back and forth. The crowd finally got into it in the latter stages. Tanaka dropkicked Makabe to the knee and Kanemoto used the standing ankle lock submission at 18:02. 3 3/4 stars. Iizuka beat Kendo Kashin in 6:12 with a choke after 2 blizzard suplexes. Also no heat for this match for 2 obvious reasons. Crowd didn't believe any of Kashin's offense, both because he's still suffering badly from the stigma of the Ryan Gracie loss, plus junior heavyweights almost never beat heavyweights, so nobody gave him a prayer to win. They wrestled well in that regal style where the wrestlers themselves and longtime fans appreciate it, but casual fans don't notice the subtleties. But match didn't build and nobody was ready for the ending that early. 1 stars. Muto and Otani beat Liger and Nakanishi in 5:44. Otani looked to have gained about 20 pounds. Didn't look roided and gained it all over, bigger legs, belly, back, etc., but he's still a small heavyweight. Muto is huge, probably 265 to 270, as he's noticeably heavier than Nakanishi, all upper body because you know he can't do any cardio or lower body work on those knees. Very short, probably to protect Muto, who did nothing but dragon screws. Otani kicked out of the brainbuster by Liger, then used his spider bomb and a cobra sleeper while Muto held Nakanishi in an armbar. 1 star. January 27th TV show was taped in Okinawa and was a good show. Opened with a non-title match as El Samurai and Kashin beat Kanemoto and Tanaka. Tanaka wasn't up to high usual level and actually match wasn't as good as you'd think. But the crowd was really into the near falls, particularly when Kanemoto hit a tiger suplex on Samurai, whose leg brushed against the middle ropes in a manner people aren't used to for a near fall. Samurai got the upset pin on Kanemoto after 2 lariats and a reverse implant DDT. 3 1/2 stars. Iizuka beat Suzuki with 2 blizzard suplexes and a choke. Real good spot where Iizuka got a reverse armbar on Suzuki and he struggled to the ropes. Better than you'd think considering Suzuki was in there and how limited he is. 2 1/4 stars. Otani beat Hiro Saito with the Cobra. Otani received a huge pop coming out like he was a superstar. It's been a long time since he got that kind of reaction. Unfortunately, the added weight doesn't help his wrestling, but he needs it to play heavyweight against the big guys. Doesn't have the stamina of before. Also, when he went for his spider bomb, he ended up just dropping Saito in a regular power bomb because he's used to doing that move to 210-pound guys as opposed to 260-pound guys. 2 stars. Main was a February 3rd fall match with Nakanishi and Yoshi and Nagata and Sasaki over Goto and Ohara and Kojima and Tenzan. Very long match, lasting about 22 minutes in total. Pretty entertaining most of the way. Nagata and Kojima carried it as expected. Nagata was so good that he even could carry Goto. Kojima pinned Yoshi for the first fall after just about killing him with a lariat. Nagata pinned Kojima in the second fall with a back suplex. Some American comedy in here. Good spot where Kojima and Tenzan went for a 3D but Nagata fought his way out. Third fall saw Nakanishi take the 3D and then a flying clothesline by Ohara, then Goto went for his back suplex finisher, but Nakanishi blocked it and put him up in the rack for the win. 3.5 stars. January 13th TV show, which was the highlights from the Inoki Osaka Dome show, drew a 3.8 rating, while the January 20th show drew a 2.6. Other Japan notes. Announced as appearing on Hashimoto's March 2nd Tokyo Sumo Hall show for the opening of his 01 promotion are Tadao Yasuda as well as Noah wrestlers Misawa, Jun Akiyama, Takao Omori, Yoshihiro Takayama, Namichi Marufuji and Akitoshi Saito as well as Alexander Otsuka of Battlerts and former Osaka pro wrestler Naohiro Hoshikawa and former 80s mainstream star Yoshiaki Yatsu, who at 44 did the Pride match and got hammered by Gary Goodridge, and has headed his own indie group, Social Pro Wrestling, for many years. They will announce more wrestlers appearing this week and rumors are going around Shinjiro Otani and Tatsuhito Takaiwa would appear as well and they are teasing the name Naoya Ogawa on the show as well. Chono claimed he and all the members of Team 2000 would go to the show and sit at ringside to start an angle. They are also doing an angle where K1 is going to send some fighters to the show including Great Kusatsu Jr. and a 6'7", 310-pound mystery man. FMW ran another pay-per-view on February 6th with Koto Fuyuki who was supposed to retire based on the stips at the last pay-per-view, teaming with Goemon and Onryo against Tetsuhiro Kuroda, who was supposed to marry Kyoko Inoue based on the stips at the last pay-per-view, teaming with Mammoth Sasaki and Inoue. The stips changed that Inoue would have to pin Fuyuki to earn her marriage to Kuroda. Inoue and Kuroda had double-teamed Fuyuki and Inoue had him pinned when guess what? Kuroda turned on Inoue and allowed Fuyuki to pin her after a power bomb. At this point, Hayabusa, doing color, went to hit the ring to sort things out when a masked really fat guy attacked Hayabusa with a chair and all the heels attacked Hayabusa's injured elbows and Kuroda put Hayabusa in an armbar. Great Sasuke then did a surprise run-in to save Hayabusa. Apparently when Hayabusa returns on May 5th, he'll be in a tag match with Sasuke as his partner. The other top match saw Masato Tanaka and Geto keep the Wu tag titles beating Ryuji Yamakawa and Kentaro Kanemura. Tanaka claimed that he was going to win every title in FMW over the next few months. Gia failed to sell out Korakuen Hall on February 2nd for the first time in a long time with the main theme being the elevation of Meiko Satomura, who they continue to put over the older legends. In the main, Satomura and Chigusa Nagao and Chikeo Nagashima beat Mayumi Ozaki and Devil Masami and Kaoru when Satomura pinned Ozaki. In his big match on the CMLL Japan Tour, Mil Mascaras retained the IWA title over Arcangel de la Muerte on February 2nd in Osaka. The tour drew poorly in just about every city, even drawing less than 1,000 legit to Korakuen Hall on January 28th even though there were a good 30,000 wrestling fans in the area and the show started 3 hours before the Dome show. On the final night of the show on February 4th at Korakuen Hall, they headlined with Mascaras and Dos Caras Jr. and Raida Jalisco Jr. and Santo over Arcangel de la Muerte and Blue Panther and Shocker and Sasuke the Great and Nozawa. The promotion after the tour did poorly is either folding for good, or temporarily suspending operations. They are publicly saying they'll revive the promotion at the end of this year or early next year and want to find a new Japanese star who is training in Mexico doing the lucha style and bring him back to build the company around, sort of like how in 1990, Yoshihiro Asai made Lucha Libre a big deal in Japan as a young Japanese wrestler who was a star in Mexico who could come back and be something of a top draw. Here and there. The situation with Tammy Sitch was that she was hospitalized for 11 days with pancreatitis. Both her kidneys and liver were about to shut down and at one point they were afraid she may have only had 48 hours left alive, but she recovered and got out of the hospital on January 19th. The February 8th issue of the Japanese publication Weekly Gong had a 2-page spread on the Observer Awards, focusing on Edge and Christian as Tag Team of the Year, Vince McMahon as Promoter and Booker of the Year, Rock as Most Charismatic, Best on Interviews and Biggest Box Office Draw, Triple H as Wrestler of the Year, Angle as Most Improved, Atlantis vs. Viano 3 as Match of the Year, WWF as Promotion of the Year and Sakuraba as Shoot Fighter of the Year. Where Are They Now Department? Del Wilkes, formerly The Patriot, who sold the gimmick to Tom Brady, who does it on the independent circuit, is currently selling cars in Lexington, South Carolina after having to retire due to 2 or 3 tricep tears. Women of Wrestling, which is a publicly traded company, posted a $2,549,000 operating loss between the months of September through November, Virtually all from live and televised entertainment. I think that's about 6 times the total loss Smoky Mountain Wrestling had in its total time of operation and as much in losses as ECW posted over the course of the entire year. Then again, it's about what WCW posted in losses every 2 weeks last year. They held their first pay-per-view on February 4th at the Great Western Forum in Inglewood, California before a huge papered house, as in, there were tons more people at the show being that they actually were busing in kids from local schools than at WCW pay-per-view events. The big debate seemed to be whether or not it was worse than the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view. The ref took a Mick Foley bump off the top of the cage through a table on the floor in the main event, totally out of context of anything they were doing. Actually, it was described as closer to the Vince McMahon version of that bump, which was Thug, Peggy Lee Leather, over Selena Majors, Bambi. The one thing positive everyone notes is that their angles and storylines make sense, and after the match, Selena attacked champ Terry Gold with her title belt. Selena juiced but stole the belt, so presume they'll be in the next main event on pay-per-view, which is April 8th if it takes place. Lee Marshall and Bobby Heenan did the announcing. They also had a hair match in which the loser, Ice Cold, was really shaved bald. Well, they hyped before the show that they are a company that lives up to their stipulations. Joey Matthews and Christian York won the NWA tag titles from Rick Michaels and David Young in a double ladder match on February 3rd in Nashville before about 300 fans. Burt Prentice is back running the show there and is talking about bringing back Jackie Fargo and the Fabulous Ones on May 5th. For those with an interest in amateur wrestling, the NCAA Championships will be airing at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on March 17th on ESPN2, which is the first time that I can ever recall the championships will have been broadcast on the day they take place. It'll air on a 4-hour tape delay. The big star in college wrestling this year is Iowa State junior Cael Sanderson, who broke Dan Gable all-time consecutive win mark and at last look had won 105 straight collegiate matches. Longtime Memphis wrestling announcer Dave Brown is being recruited by the Democratic Party in Tennessee to run for Congress, and he has some interest in it. Brown is still the most popular weatherman and most well-liked newscaster in the Memphis market. He was also being recruited to run for city manager of Lakeland, Tennessee, the Memphis suburb he lives in, but wasn't interested. iGeneration Wrestling sent out a press release to say they had no involvement in the March tour of Australia called Superstars of Wrestling, headlined by Warrior vs. Hennig, but also said they had registered a trademark to Superstars of Wrestling and hinted at legal action. Sandman, who is doing a training school in the Philadelphia area, wants to start running shows in the bar that he owns, which would hold 500 people. A group called World Association of Wrestling will be doing a TV pilot on April 21st in Norwich, England. A promotion called Great Britain Hardcore is attempting to follow in the footsteps of Big Japan, which legitimately increased its attendance by building around American heels from Combat Zone Wrestling. They announced May 27th for a GBH vs. CZW show in England. Jersey All Pro Wrestling ran a show on February 3rd at the old ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Viking Hall, and brought Sandman in as the big guest and draw about 300 fans. If anyone is ever going to do a study as to how television ratings correlate with live attendance, figure this one out. On January 27th in Puerto Rico, the WWC television show drew a 13.5 rating and 43 share. It was the second highest rated show of any kind of the weekend in Puerto Rico despite airing Saturday morning as opposed to prime time. However, just 1 week earlier WWC had to cancel its show in Ponce when just 35 fans showed up. IWA, which also isn't drawing, on the same day did a 9.8 rating and 31 share, and WWF did an 8.8 and 27 share. Sunday ratings saw WWC do a 12.7 and 38 share and IWA do an 8.0 and 23 share. Another of those England shows using WWF characters takes place on February 28th in Cardiff, Wales, with Justin Hansford as Kane, Russ Matthews as Stone Cold Steve Austin, Andy Chambers as Crash Holly, Adam Clark as Bubba Ray Dudley, Martin Ubana as D. Von Dudley, Neil Evans as X-Pac, and John Reed as Chris Jericho. Mark Marrow has started training in the ring again, which sounds like he's getting ready for a comeback, and one would assume that means WCW. Well, I think everyone knew Sable was going to wind up in WCW at some point when her non-compete runs out. That'll be a novelty for about 2 weeks. MMA, Pride's first show of the year, will be March 25th at the Seibu Dome. Yuki Kondo, who is the top star in Pancrase, may fight in Pride later this year. Kondo challenged Kazushi Sakuraba and Kiyoshi Tamura after winning his bout at the February 4th Pancrase show at Korakuen Hell over Eiji Ishikawa via doctor stoppage in the 3rd round. The challenge was mainly just to get a pop. There is considered a small possibility of Kondo actually doing a match with Sakuraba, since it seems likely Sakuraba won't be matched with Rickson Gracie. The Deep promotion has some interest in Tamura vs. Kondo on one of its shows. Pride officials responded to this saying that Kondo would first have to prove himself in Pride against top foreigners before getting a match with Sakuraba. Takada Nobuhiko also said the same thing. Masami Ozaki, the Pancrase president, said it would be impossible for Kondo to fight on the March 25th Seibu Dome Pride show because he has to fight on the March 31st Pancrase show in Osaka, but Pride is talking with Pancrase, two companies that have never worked together in the past, about putting together Kondo vs. Renzo Gracie. UFC lineup for February 23rd in Atlantic City looks to be Tito Ortiz vs. Evan Tanner for the middleweight title, which looks to be a strong match on paper. Ortiz is both the better wrestler and striker, but Tanner is experienced enough, and if he can hold on, in a long fight it often comes down to conditioning. The bantamweight title has Jens Pulver vs. Kaoru Uno to create the first champ. Pulver has a powerful punch, but would have to be considered the underdog against the more well-rounded Uno. Also Pedro Rizzo builds for another heavyweight title shot going against Josh Barnett. Doesn't look impressive physically but has a 25-0 record. Bobby Hoffman versus a new opponent, possibly Giant Gon McGee. Scheduled opponent Ian Freeman lost to Asami Shibuya via ref stoppage in 3:51 on the Pancrase February 4th show and was injured, and UFC was prepared in the advent because of the UFC curse, with McGee slated as the sub in the event Freeman was hurt. However, McGee may have gotten sick, so it wasn't a lock at press time he'd be the replacement. In a heavyweight battle, Jeremy Horn vs. Elvis Sonosik, who is coming off a decision loss to Frank Shamrock on the December 10th Tokyo Dome show, and Fabiano Ia vs. Phil Johns. It's one of those shows where the matches look competitive on paper, but nobody can ever predict with certainty what is going to happen in shoots. Sonosik is a replacement for Alexander Dantas, who pulled out this past week due to a leg injury. Coliseum 2001 officials went to Los Angeles this past week to negotiate with Rickson Gracie for a match with Naoya Ogawa at the Tokyo Dome in November. Gracie said that he would decide in March which organization he would do his one match this year for. Former UFC competitor Kevin Jackson, who lost in the match to determine the first middleweight champion to Frank Shamrock in 1997, was named coach of the U. National Freestyle Team. Jackson, the 1992 Olympic gold medalist and two-time world champion, retired from UFC fighting in 1998 when he took the job as an assistant coach of the national team, and they didn't want him participating in UFC because of the belief it wasn't good for you wrestling to have a coach participate in it. Mike Bernardo vs. Jerome LeBanner, which is a battle of the two heaviest hitters in K1, headlines the March 17th show at the Yokohama Arena, which is the first major show of the year. Also Cyril Abidi vs. Mirko Krokop Filipovic, which is a battle of the new fighters who they are hoping to get over to create new superstars. K1 ran a show in Holland headlined by Peter Aert's first match in his native country in 8 years, drawing a sellout 7,500 with a one-round knockout of Stuart Green with a knee. The show was a huge deal on Holland television. Former Pancrase headliners Jason DeLucia and Minoru Suzuki, one of the pioneers of the group in 1993, were brought back on February 4th in a catch wrestling, no striking allowed, match which DeLucia won in 2:49 with a triangle choke. The main on the show was Sanae Kikuta vs. Alex Steibling, ending in 3:11 with no finish as Kikuta suffered a dangerous cut from an illegal headbutt, and the match was stopped. ECW. It was reported in Mexico that Antonio Pena was interested in buying ECW, but that the $5 million asking price caused him to reevaluate his thoughts. Pena was looking to buy it for closer to the $200,000 range, so they weren't in the ballpark, and it never had a chance because Pena doesn't realize the costs of doing wrestling in this country. Concrete Marketing / V2 Records will be putting out the next ECW CD on March 20th, regardless if there is an ECW by that time or not. A video to go along with it featuring ECW wrestlers will be to a remake of Balls to the Walls. WCW. Was Nitro on February 5th in Tupelo bad or what? The show opened with a pathetic angle. Nash and Flair had a verbal duel. Flair invited Nash to come to the ring. Animal blocked the way and Nash treated him like he was Lance Storm or Alex Wright, blowing by him with 2 blows. He then treated Flair like he was Lance Storm or Alex Wright, making him look like a fool. It's great for Nash, but what does it say for a company filled with fools? Nash pulled Flair's clothes off and poor Rick wasn't in the condition to be out there with no clothes on. Someone in the company needs to read this sentence to understand why the ratings have fallen. The vast majority of the audience that still watches WCW is older. Even if they don't like Flair, he is an icon in this business. Nash treating him like such a that segment doesn't make Nash look good, and while they think the face beating the heel up makes the face look good, in this instance, it doesn't get Nash over because Flair comes across so pathetic, and it makes the audience sad because nobody wants to see a legend look pathetic. Aside from the fact this was poorly acted and executed, WCW doesn't need to be continually its dwindling audience off in this show, from start to finish, really told the tale that whomever allowed this product to go on the air has no clue how to turn this company around. Steiner, Bagwell, Luger, Sanders and Jarrett came out for the save, but Nash threatened to break Flair's neck if they made a move. Cat then ordered a bunch of silly matches with Steiner for the rest of the show, including screwing up and saying the main event was going to be a title match. The plan was not for a title match but only for the CEO job at stake. But since Scott was going over anyway, once Cat had spoken, they decided against correcting him. First was Steiner beating Young Dragons and Noble and Karagias. That'll teach those guys to have the best pay-per-view match of the last year. Steiner treated them like fools, putting 3 of the 4 guys in the recliner at the same time for the submission. Rick Steiner beat Douglas, who had a cast of his bad wrist from their last meeting, to win the U title in a terrible match after the Death Valley Driver. Steiner kicked out of Douglas franchiser. At this point, this first 45 minutes was actually worse than that horrible night where they spent the first hour with Nash and Torrie Wilson doing poorly acted skits and had no wrestling at all and killed the first hour rating from that point forward. Dustin Rhodes came out for an interview. Flair went crazy and had his mic cut and had Doug Dillinger take him out and went to a commercial break. This came across a lot like something Russo would do to pretend something was real that nobody would buy because it looked like everything else, but worse. DDP beat Steiner via DQ in his second match. Steiner didn't treat DDP like a fool. His mouth was also busted open. Steiner attacked the ref for no reason other than it allowed DDP to give him the diamond cutter but not pin him. DDP was in the crowd celebrating when he was attacked by Jarrett and the returning Canyon. El Nino, who was Mysterio Jr. under a mask, won a non-title match from Guerrero Jr. Mysterio Jr. when he first started with AAA in 1992 was called Super Nino. Mysterio Jr. hid most of his moves, so this was a good match. Easily the best thing on the show, but not as good as you'd expect from these two. Mysterio Jr. unmasked, and did a springboard something or other, looked like it was supposed to be a Hurricane Rana, but Guerrero Jr. was totally out of position and he just sort of changed in midair and fell on him. Schiavone in his silly statement of the week after Mysterio Jr. did some flying move and then spun around, compared him with Bugsy McGraw, who for those who weren't around in that era, was just about the worst wrestler in captivity. It would be the equivalent of Ross comparing Kurt Angle to Tiger Chung Lee. Palumbo and O'Haire beat Awesome and Storm in a very disappointing match. They tried a lot of hot moves and messed up 80% of them. The longer it went, the worse it got. O'Haire and Awesome traded some of the worst looking chops. Finally Storm was blinded and put Awesome in the half crab. Skipper told him what he was doing. When he released it, they got rid of Storm and double-teamed Awesome and O'Haire pinned him with a Shanton bomb. Bagwell went to a 10-minute draw with Adams which went 5:28. Actually, it was one of the shortest matches on the show. It was booked this way so they could introduce the time limit draw as a new finisher and probably was short because it was late in the show and other things had gone long. It was booked to go 10 minutes. Sad thing is, who booked a Adams match to go 10 minutes on TV? Boring match till Luger came out. Clark attacked Luger outside the ring as the big surprise. Animal then attacked Clark. Adams had Bagwell set up for a pin and the bell rang. Luger racked Adams after while Clark was selling another head injury when Animal threw him into the steps. Speaking of Animal, after drawing that strong rating last week, there was no mention of Dusty the entire show. By this point the show was so bad I thought people were actually trying to kill the company. Adams then challenged Luger for Thunder. That didn't change my way of thinking. Maine saw Scott Steiner keep the title in a handicap match. You would think Ace at least would understand how to rebuild a dead title if he's the guy in charge, beating Nash and Rick Steiner. This was so obvious it was actually painful, as Nash powerbombed Scott and then Rick dropped an elbow on Nash and Scott pinned him. They both pounded on Nash and went to leave, but then DDP came out with a chair just as the show went off the air. The Steiners are back together again. When Bret Hart talked about the wrestlers being the marks for the fans as opposed to the other way around, he couldn't have been more right, although he meant it because they were injuring themselves to get pops from fans who didn't appreciate it. What it really is are that they think the fans are the marks, but they are the marks because they are booking things for themselves that fans don't want to see, and more importantly, won't pay to see. After those 2 hours, they had to tape Thunder. Hayashi pinned Helms in a very good match when Guerrero distracted Helms and Hayashi hit a German suplex. O'Haire pinned Smiley with the same Glacier stuff. After the match they did a series of run-ins that was described as catastrophic and in bad need of editing, with Jindrak and Stasiak attacking O'Hare. O'Hare totally blew his comeback spot and crowd started laughing. Palumbo made a messed up save. Flair came out with Animal, Bagwell, Luger, Jarrett, and Steiners, who are now called the Magnificent Seven. Nash confronts them with Adams, Cat and DDP. Cat pinned Skipper but was attacked by Storm and Awesome after the match. Adams pinned Luger in a really bad match. Bagwell and Clark both got involved. Mysterio Jr. pinned Wall. While it sounds brutal, it was said to be very entertaining. Wall squashed him until a comeback after a missed leg drop off the ropes. Morris ran in and took out Wall and Mysterio Jr. pinned him. We beat up two indie guys masquerading as fans in the stands. Conan made Sanders submit to the Tequila Sunrise. Main event was Nash and Page over Jarrett and Rick Steiner when Nash powerbombed Steiner. Show ended with another confrontation with Flair's guys against Nash's guys. Bischoff was not at the show and the difference was said to have been like night and day. Everyone is on their toes when he's around and most of the guys work hard. With him not there, nobody cared, and there was no energy backstage and the content of the shows led to morale being horrible. What had everyone even more concerned is why he wasn't at the show, because one would think it would take something very important. The general belief is that Hogan and Goldberg will be key parts of the angle where the company does the shutdown on the pay-per-view, if there is a shutdown, as the company is acting as if it's business as usual, including buying plane tickets and still selling tickets to all the shows during the period they are supposed to be shut down, which means Hogan is probably 2 weeks from his first appearance. Don't know the angle, but it either could be Hogan returning with the old belt to challenge Steiner, that was the scheduled angle when they did the angle last year, for Hogan to return and challenge whomever the champion was, a few months later, or being hired by the new owners to be the new CEO, and do a program with Flair once again. WCW released 5 of the 8 women on the roster: Tigress, Paisley, Major Guns, Leia Meow, and Daphne, leaving Ms. Jones, Stacy Keibler, who is not being used currently, and Midaja. Clearly Keibler was the most marketable of the group, but WCW hasn't figured out how to make it work. Some saw it as a sign of Terry Taylor losing power since he was also speaking up for the women when others wanted to dump them. As for the others, Daphne served no purpose and I don't think many people even knew Leia Meow was around. Guns was a horrid actress, but then again Deborah Marshall-Williams in the WWF is 40 and is almost as bad an actress, and the WWF had no problems getting her over as a big-time star, nor getting China to sell 1 million copies of Playboy. The bottom line is that the WWF can get anyone over and WCW can't, even when they are marketable. Of the ones cut, I always thought Paisley had a chance because she can speak well and has potential as from a PR standpoint. Jones, I guess because of how well she and Kat play off each other, was showing the most charisma of the group. Tigress and Paisley are joining other former Nitro girls Chai, Spice and Fire in a girl band called Diversity 5. What is even more surprising than the idea that the return of Dusty Rhodes did so well in the ratings, was where it did. Rhodes skewed far stronger among women than men, and the younger the women, the better the angle did. Rhodes' strongest demo was women 18 to 24, but he also kept the tune-out rate to Raw almost non-existent among both males and children, with the only demo Rhodes showed no drawing power toward was teenagers, who turned to Raw in droves right in the middle of the angle. Virtually all these age groups switched to a large degree to Raw after the Rhodes angle was over. There were more than 1 million women watching the Dusty angle, 102,000 of them college-aged. Keep in mind this was going head-to-head against a verbal duel on the other station involving Rock and Angle, as compared with 687,000 women watching Nash vs. Luger and Buff in the main event, of which 58,000 were college-aged. Clark suffered a concussion from that brutal chair shot by Animal at the January 29 Baltimore Thunder taping. Rick Steiner's injury record is growing as besides potatoing Bam Bam Bigelow, he also injured the wrist of Douglas and the neck of Jarrett, doing the Death Valley driver finisher. Helms and Kidman had a very good match on the SmackDown tapings in Baltimore. Goldberg, while a guest on a Tulsa radio station, had a prank pulled on him by a local radio prankster, who called the show, said that Goldberg signed his son's head and that the son has been suffering from hair loss. Goldberg fell to the bait, and went crazy thinking that the guy was setting up a bogus lawsuit, and even threatened to knock his head off. Now if he did the latter, that would set him up for a more legitimate lawsuit. On a radio interview with Mancow, DDP denied having anything to do with Mark Madden being fired, even going so far as to say he misses Madden not being around and thought he was a really good announcer. In a TV commercial in the Nashville market for the February 18th pay-per-view, the voiceover really says, "Expect a night of run-ins." AJ Styles and Air Paris are expected to sign 3-year contracts with this group this week after a hot tryout match on January 26. In a story that may have some pro wrestling repercussions, since there are already several lawsuits out against WCW, none against WWF, claiming that pro wrestlers have been wrongly classified as independent contractors, Time Warner made a settlement of up to $5.5 million in November to hundreds of employees misclassified as independent contractors and temporary employees for their failure to be properly recognized, saying that workers who perform under the same criteria as employees should also be treated fairly through coverage by a company's benefits program, in particular, retirement and health-related benefits. The workers involved in the suit worked for Time magazine. WCW won a default judgment against AWA Superstars of Wrestling permanently enjoining the company from using any trademarks or service marks listed as owned by WCW. This stemmed from an October lawsuit by WCW for advertising former Nitro Girl Fire as appearing on the show, since Fire is a WCW-owned stage name for Terry Byrne. Super Dragon and Rising Sun of Revolution Pro Wrestling are expected to get a tryout soon on recommendation of Conan. Heenan, making the rounds on talk shows, has been joking he was dropped from Nitro because Russo wanted a more MTV look, so he hired Madden. It's a nice talk show joke, but the reality was Heenan played himself out of his position. Madden was put on Nitro by Bill Bush and Kevin Sullivan, in between the Russo reigns, largely because Heenan's work had declined and they needed somebody new in the spot. Vampiro had his pay cut due to the injury absence. February 5, Nitro and Thunder taping in Tupelo, Mississippi drew 3,567 fans, which was 2,530 paying $66,258. WWF. The Royal Rumble is expected to come in slightly lower than last year. At this point the estimate is 568,000 buys, which is a 1.35 buy rate. Last year ended up doing 640,000 buys, 1.60, and the hope is when everything is counted up, this year can come close to that number. Georgia Dome Raw on February 5 was just another show with largely disappointing heat. Part of the problem were a few face versus face matches with the crowd not knowing how to react. Opener saw Jericho keep the IC title over Matt Hardy. Lita did the Hurricane Rana off the top on Jericho for a near fall. Malenko attacked Hardy while Jericho was selling and not seeing it, and when Hardy was laid out, Jericho pinned him with a Lionsault. Matt attacked Dean after the match, but Saturn attacked Matt. Jericho saved Matt until Guerrero, looking a good 20 pounds heavier, returned and attacked Jericho and left him laying with a frog splash. Rock came out for a promo. He teased a future program with Austin, noting that while Austin screwed Triple H out of the title on SmackDown, in doing so, he also screwed him out of the title. Rock was booed when he complained about Austin, but once he got off the Austin subject, they were chanting his name. He challenged Triple H to a singles match. Stephanie instead came out and Rock insulted her. Triple H came out wearing the big sleeveless jeans jacket over a leather jacket. Everyone thinks that looks goofy, but 20 years ago, that was the style. Just before Rock and Triple H were about to square off, Angle showed up and did a good promo. Then Vince came out. Vince told the fans if they booed him, they'd never get an XFL franchise. He talked about the stock being up. I guess he hadn't checked that day, because he lost more money on paper that day than all of his wrestlers will make in their lifetimes. Tons more XFL references. It's about to get real old, being that every TNN commercial during the show was an XFL commercial. Vince announced Triple H and Austin versus Rock and Angle for the main event, without any kind of a logical explanation as to why. Maybe he was looking at bookings that make no sense in Mexico. Edge and Christian beat Kaientai. They announced Kaientai at a combined weight of 270 pounds. They aren't that small. Fans were chanting USA. Actually a light chant. Now that was funny. Fans were mugging to the camera and paying no attention to the match, which wasn't getting much of a reaction. They did a stacked up superplex on Taka for the win. Regal was spying on Stephanie getting her makeup done and complaining about her dad and Trish. Vince was on the phone mad about all the criticism of the XFL, bragging about the ratings and saying the people liked it. Stephanie confronted him about the earrings in his bed, but Regal showed up and thanked Vince for letting him use his room last night, acting like he had a hot date. They said on a commercial that 25 million people watched the debut of the XFL on Saturday night, actually 14.1 million, and even throwing in the audience for the UPN game as well only gets you to 19.6 million. Kat supposedly stripped for the APA, since she had no money but wanted protection. Dudley's beat Undertaker and Kane in a title match via DQ. Not good. Fans wanted tables and didn't get them. Edge and Christian ran in with a chair. Really lame finish with Taker taking the chair and the ref seeing it and calling for the DQ. Fans didn't like the finish. The explanation was that Edge and Christian wanted to make sure Undertaker and Kane didn't win the belts because they were getting a shot at them and figured Dudley's would be easier to beat. Should be noted that while last week, with Survivor and Friends, Raw was nothing but a commercial for SmackDown. With SmackDown, even with all that push not being able to handle that competition, they barely acknowledged its existence this week and instead hyped the XFL to death. Vince and Trish were about to start something when Austin walked in to thank Vince for making the match. Vince was confused. Kat did an interview and said she was starting a group called Right to Nudity. Boy, was this dumb. RTC came out. She kissed Richards and Bradshaw clotheslined Richards. Kat was about to strip, but Ivory stopped her. In a funny spot, when Kat was called a slut, it was bleeped out live. Then when they showed the replay, it wasn't bleeped out. Raven teased hitting on Molly Holly, who was waiting on Ninja Girl Tori to pound on her. Raven tried to hit on her. Molly attacked her and then gave Raven a low blow, allowing Ninja Girl to beat her up with some lame ninja offense. Haku and Rikishi beat Too Cool. Worm got the biggest in-ring pop of the show. Rikishi pinned GMS with the Banzai. Benoit beat Snow with the crossface. Good match, actually the best one of the night on either show, but no heat. Snow did 2 moonsaults for a near fall and even then nobody bought for a second Benoit was losing. Benoit did a crossface out of nowhere. Snow's main role seems to be to talk with Vince and set up the program with Vince versus Foley. Chyna was at WWF New York. She's supposed to have this career-ending neck injury, but doesn't even wear a neck brace, and is moving her head around fine. Lawler and Ross ripped on Rudy Martz, the TV sports columnist in USA Today who gave them both bad grades for announcing. While Martz was unfair to them, maybe unfair isn't the word, not understanding that McMahon doesn't want traditional football announcing, they came off really bad reacting with Lawler saying Martz must be single, either that or his wife's best friend comes with batteries, and Ross making a remark about Martz drinking heavily. Rock and Angle beat Triple H and Austin in 7:50. Rock decked Angle. Show came out and laid out Rock, leaving Angle alone against both Austin and Triple H. Austin kept messing with Triple H for the rest of the match. Triple H hit the pedigree on Angle, but Austin distracted the ref who couldn't count. Angle then gave Triple H a low blow and a hard chair shot, and Austin left the ref count Triple H down. Austin then gave Angle the stunner after the match. From the Thunder taping the next night in North Charleston, South Carolina. In a match on Heat, Undertaker and Kane beat Kaientai. Kane and Taker blew their big spots. Taker messed up his first choke slam. The first attempt at the last ride powerbomb was screwed up, but that'll probably be taken care of in editing. Angle also appeared on the show beating Rios. SmackDown opened with a lengthy Vince interview with Trish and Regal out there. Gimmick was they'd pick 2 guys, one representing Triple H and one representing Austin. The winner would have his guy be able to pick the Stips for No Way Out. They picked Gunn to represent Austin and Jericho to represent Triple H. At the end of the segment, Regal kissed Trish, much to her and Vince's chagrin. Triple H was mad because he thought Jericho would lay down on purpose. Saturn and Benoit beat Hardys when Malenko threw Jeff into the ring steps and Benoit beat Jeff with the crossface. Trish yelled at Regal about the kiss when Stephanie showed up. Trish left and Stephanie started telling Regal off, saying she saw through his act on Raw protecting Vince. Regal insisted to Stephanie and he and Trish were in love. Triple H told Gunn to do him a favor and laid down for Jericho. Gunn said he would never do such a thing, so Triple H used a fire extinguisher on him to injure him. Rikishi pinned Snow as Vince was again getting back at Snow for being Foley's friend. Edge and Christian beat Dudley's via DQ in a tag title match when Undertaker and Kane came out and Taker choke slammed Edge for the DQ. Dudleys were mad about Taker and Kane costing them the match, so they started a fight, but that did them no good since Taker and Kane each laid them out with choke slams and signaled for wanting the belts. Edge and Christian complained to Vince about Undertaker and Kane costing them a title win, and Vince set up Edge and Christian versus Taker and Kane for Raw on February 12th at the Continental Airlines Arena, with the winning team facing Dudleys for the belts at No Way Out. Hardcore Holly beat Raven to win the Hardcore title, but Ninja Girl and Molly fought after and Ninja hit Bob with a 2x4 to allow Raven to regain the title. Raven is going for the all-time record for most title reigns in WWF history, since he gets to win the title at least once a night. Ivory and Goodfather and Buchanan and Richards beat Right to Nudity, which was Kat and Jackie and APA. Everyone brawled to the back, leaving Ivory versus Kat, and Ivory pinned her. With Gunn injured, Vince told Triple H he had to replace him against Jericho, but with no Stips. Good match with a lot of heat. Guerrero got involved attacking Jericho. Jericho knocked him off the apron and went for the lionsault, but Triple H got his knees up and hit the pedigree for the win. After the match, Austin came out with some beers. Guerrero said he wanted a beer and got obnoxious, so Austin hit him with the stunner. Austin distracted Triple H, allowing Jericho to put him in the walls. Vince announced Rock vs. Rikishi at Raw. If Rock wins, Triple H gets to pick the stips at No Way Out, and if Rikishi wins, Austin picks the stips. Angle and Rios did an angle to build up their heat match. Main was Rock pinning Show to earn a title shot at Angle at No Way Out. Match was said to have been horrible. Long bear hug by Show. Show kicked out of the people's elbow. Show did a choke slam, but ref was bumped. Angle hit Show twice with a chair and went to hit Rock, but Rock got away and hit the rock bottom on Show for the pin. Drew Pearson, the GM of the NY/NJ Hitmen, Jerry DiNardo, coach of the Birmingham Bolts, and Phil Mushnick were on Jim Rome's Last Word on February 5 talking about the XFL debut. They had various opinions, as you'd expect. Rome, who earlier had said the XFL wasn't football and would probably make it, revised his opinion, saying the XFL was football, but was lousy football, and wasn't going to make it because of that. Mushnick said he wasn't there to discuss whether the league would make it, although he thought it wasn't sleazy enough for the wrestling audience and was too sleazy for the football audience, with the quality of play, but felt the first week's ratings were a novelty since the USFL and WNBA opened huge when it came to TV ratings and fell greatly. He was critical of aspects of the television product and the hype. Pearson said that the suggestive hype as it pertained to sex and violence was a way to create a needed buzz, but now that the season has started, it would be marketed as football. DiNardo kept saying the league was of higher caliber than NFL Europe and the play would be getting better as the season went on. Rome made a good comment, which was that all the advertising was knocking the NFL for this and that, but when the product was displayed, it was worse than the NFL in every single category. Pearson didn't argue the point, and both he and DiNardo gave answers I think McMahon would cringe at by saying that the caliber of play isn't NFL caliber, and nobody said it was, but maybe some of the top players would be discovered by the NFL. Mushnick said that McMahon's intentions for the league weren't to develop talent for the NFL, and Pearson kind of realized he'd talked himself into a corner. When talking about the hyping, saying we had to do what we had to do, Pearson came off pretty bad. DiNardo said there was nothing in the stadium that went on in the Orlando-Chicago game that he was ashamed of, and then Mushnick brought up a comment on TV made by Bosworth about Clinton and Lewinsky, which was no more raunchy than a Jay Leno joke, but it made DiNardo look bad because he had to admit he hadn't seen the game on television, and Mushnick pointed out it's the television version that the public is seeing. Mushnick was really high-strung and came off badly to those predisposed to hating him because he's always negative toward McMahon, but he killed Pearson and DiNardo on points in every argument. Rome disagreed with Mushnick, saying it wasn't the football that McMahon would be selling and is the main product, saying that as it turned out, football was the main product, but it was a lousy product. Mushnick said if the ratings get bad, McMahon will change the product and ratchet up the sleaze. Pearson and DiNardo said they got involved because it was going to be a football product. Pearson and DiNardo sounded to me like wrestlers in the 80s and bodybuilders in the 90s who were brought in under the guise McMahon was going to push the sport aspect of each, only to find out once they were involved that McMahon is all about his version of entertainment and uses the products to present it, which isn't a dirty word because he's been super successful at one and failed at the other. Rome couldn't have been more wrong in saying this thing is going to fly or not based on the quality of play on the field. It's going to fly based on the marketing and how cool McMahon will be able to portray the product. If he can't make the product cool, TV viewers will find something else. If he can make it an entertaining spectacle, as long as the average fan can't tell the football quality is bad, it'll do fine. And the jury is totally out on what the answer to that is going to be because the first week was clearly stage one of a work in progress. Walter Kowalski ripped the hell out of Chyna for her comments regarding him in the book. In an interview with Slam Wrestling, Kowalski called Joanie Lauer's description of how she got her job with the WWF through a friend having an affair with a WWF talent agent who set up a meeting with Triple H and Shawn Michaels as fiction. She's making all that up. She lies and lies and lies. She's talking about Springfield, Massachusetts. About the big show. The WWF's going to be there and she shows up. That's a lot of crap. Kowalski said he was the one who brokered the deal with WWF after telling Shane McMahon that Kevin Nash and WCW were interested in her. Kowalski had told that story in a 1998 interview as well. Kowalski was mad Lauer snubbed him when he confronted her at the funeral of Owen Hart. I'm not sure confronting someone at Owen Hart's funeral and bragging that you were the one who got her hired was quite the right timing, but she turned and walked away from him. Kowalski was deeply offended by Lauer's descriptions of him, which came across as funny on first description, but after a while in the book, wound up as terribly mean-spirited. Ross report from this past week and some comments on the various items. After last week not mentioning the Polacco signing, just incredible, because they had made an agreement to keep it quiet until the situation with ECW was finalized one way or another. It was publicly announced, as well as coming to verbal deals with Lynn and Rhino. Ross denied Polacco's deal was influenced by either Triple H or Shawn Michaels. Those close to the situation say Triple H went to bat, but it was a very simple negotiation, and it was simply a very short phone call last week where Ross offered Polacco a job, after Polacco was advised by friends about 2 weeks earlier to call. Put over the Benoit vs. Nick Dinsmore match that he saw in Louisville. Said that Mark Henry deserves another shot in the WWF after how much weight he's dropped. Said Leviathan has unlimited potential but needs more time in OVW. Called Sheldon Benjamin and Brock Lesnar close to can't-miss prospects, noting Lesnar, at 304 pounds, did a shooting star press. I'd agree on Benjamin. Lesnar certainly has the body and athletic ability and he'll probably make it, but I don't know if I'd go so far to call him can't miss. Said Sylvester Turkey and Ron Waterman need work on their interviews and charisma. At some point WWF is going to start reviewing a lot of these guys on developmental, and some are going to be let go to lead to signing new people. On a side note, I'm really surprised neither New Japan or WCW has contacted David Nelson after he was dropped, even if just as an experiment, although they probably both don't know who he is. He didn't leave any friends behind in OVW, with the feeling being that he was a former football star and champion bodybuilder/powerlifter who was already 36 and figured after 3 months of training, because of his freakish physique, he'd be in the WWF, and it doesn't work that way today. There was a day it would have. Said that Russ McCulloch has really improved, but agreed with our assessment that he simply looks too much like Kevin Nash for his own good. If he came to WWF, the fans would clamor for Nash to return, so unless it's a prelude to bringing Nash in, and those two would have a difficult time working with each other in the ring, he can't be brought in without a makeover. Also praised Damaja. BJ Payne and Robbie D said he expected the Dupes, Oz brothers, Scott Vick and Steve Bradley, to make it to the WWF in the next year. Ross talked about writing a book himself on his 25 years in wrestling. Now where is he going to find the time for that? He also talked about doing a second Christmas cookbook for next year. Hoped negotiations with Michaels on a new contract would be finalized within a few days and he'd be back on TV soon. Ross noted the criticism of the SmackDown Extreme show, saying that ECW followers said the show failed to deliver. My own thoughts were that it was a decent show. Main event was good and the opening tag with Hardys vs. Dudleys was also real good. Rest was typical WWF fare of late, which isn't bad. Since the show was hyped so much more than usual, and given that Extreme tagged due to the competition, delivering only a normal show would be seen as a disappointment. Noted Bruce Pritchard and Michael Hayes being more involved in the writing, and said that he wanted Heyman on the team, and even went so far as to make the comment, "I'll drink his Kool-Aid, but he's got to be on board to serve it up." Said D. Von Dudley has a shoulder injury he's working through, and Rock is working through a minor neck injury. Regal is still being held out of action. Tiger Ali Singh has a minor concussion and a neck problem, and he and Low Down will be off TV and house shows for a while. Saturn is working through lower back pain. He estimated Malenko being back in about 2 weeks and that Gangrel should be cleared to return in mid-February. Again, said Big Show has dropped weight to 414 and blamed some of his problems on in the early years of his career listening to the wrong people, read that Hulk Hogan, and close with an ominous line of either he makes them changes, as he is currently trying to do, and succeeds in the Federation, or he fails to make changes and leaves the company permanently. Said the China edition of Playboy sold 1.3 million copies, which is a ridiculously high number for that magazine, noting they topped Sable's sale figures from a few years ago. China, and doing all the talk shows this week to promote her book, noted that she and Triple H had broken up. The legal publication Lawyers Weekly listed the $18 million settlement in the Owen Hart case as being the largest out-of-court settlement of its type in more than 4 years. The second largest of the year 2000 was an $8 million settlement over a fatal natural gas explosion caused by leaking pipes. Foley spoke on February 1st at Indiana University in Indiana, Pennsylvania, not the famous University of Indiana. Report we got was he had a packed house and was rally funny, talking about how he wrestled in the city in 1986 and 1987 against Shane Douglas, who used the name Troy Orndorff at the time, when both were breaking in. He ripped on the University of Indiana study on Al the Lewd Axe during a year of Raw. Foley said he didn't believe the numbers, so watched 20 episodes of SmackDown and found the numbers lower. Well, what a surprise. comparing the toned-down SmackDown of 2000 with Raw of 1999, and said he spoke to the professor who did the study and said the professor counted replays in his study. Foley said if he were to watch all the replays shown of Mark McGwire's home runs, he would have hit tons more. He said the professor considered Austin drinking beer as simulated drug use and a woman touching a man's arm as simulated sex. He also ripped on the PTC. He also hinted that he would wrestle Vince McMahon at WrestleMania, saying he may have one more match left in him and later saying if he did the match, it would be against Vince. A trial date for Davey Boy Smith on charges of threatening bodily harm to his former brother-in-law and current legal husband of his girlfriend, Bruce Hart, is scheduled for July 17 in Calgary. Charges against Smith for similar threats to Hart's sisters, Smith's former wife Diana Hart Smith and Ellie Neidhart Hart, were dropped last month when Smith signed a peace bond. Wrestling historian Mike Chapman is doing a book on the 50 greatest American wrestlers in history. While he has not named all of them, I'd figure knowing Chapman that at least a few pro wrestlers would make the list, most notably Frank Gotch and Danny Hodge. Angle is also a lock. In the Sports Rec video charts, Tony Hawk is number 1, followed by Rock. New tapes of Armageddon and Survivor Series are no's. 3 and 4. ECW has tapes at number 11, 14 and 18, while the FMW tape is number 16 and Juggalos are number 17. WWF has 12 of the top 20. Austin as well as other WWF stars like Kane, Hardys, Lita and Benoit led to OVW drawing its largest crowd, by far, in history with very close to a sellout. They had seats blocked for VIPs that weren't filled but all regular seats were accounted for, 5,010 paying $72,166 for the postponed Christmas Chaos show that finally took place on January 31st. With the exception of a WWF pay-per-view show in 1996, it was probably the largest crowd for wrestling in the building since the glory days more than 16 years ago. This was said to be tons better than the anniversary show, particularly when it came to crowd heat. Some notes from the show. Sylvester Turkey is no longer the Collector and has taken the name Sly Scraper. Crowd apparently went nuts for the finish of his match since first Lesnar did the previously mentioned shooting star press followed by Benjamin doing a 450. Buddy Landel made a surprise appearance underneath. Big Show pinned Henry in 90 seconds with a choke slam. Since Henry is staying and Show is leaving the territory, Show squashing Henry so quickly doesn't make a lot of sense. Hardys and Lita beat Disciples of Sin in what was reported as a good match that actually stole the show as far as heat. Nick Dinsmore beat Benoit via DQ in another good match. Benoit after the match expressed interest in coming back and working a long match just because he doesn't get the opportunity in WWF to work long matches. Finish saw Rico Constantino attack Dinsmore for the DQ. The Jim Ross interview with Austin ended up with Constantino and Bolin coming out, and of course Austin stunned Constantino and poured beer on him. Constantino's mic work as a heel was said to be really good in building to the pop. Only thing strange about this is on TV for 2 months they've been building up Russ McCulloch saying he was going to confront Austin and get stunned. Change of plans was because Cornette was really impressed with Constantino and Dinsmore's work getting over on a show in Huntington, West Virginia where nobody knew who either was and basically wanted to push Constantino as the top heel challenger for the belt, the spot McCulloch was being groomed for, but he wasn't doing as well, and wanted him to get the rub off being in an angle with Austin. Leviathan did his first job in the main event for Kane, in a match where Hardys and Lita, Disciples of Sin and finally Austin all did run-ins and Austin gave Leviathan a stunner and Kane choke slammed him for the win. Bill Moody, Paul Bearer, was backstage at the show. The expectation at this point is he's going to work under Ross in the talent relations department since Bruce Pritchard has added so many new duties. Eric Angle, Kurt's older brother, started training at the Ohio Valley School under Dan Briley on February 5. Survivor Series is expected to be from the Air Canada Centre in Toronto. After the success in Phoenix of selling out both Raw and SmackDown on successive nights, which made for a lot less setup expense and a lot easier on everyone involved in the show and production, they're doing that at least 3 times in upcoming months. On March 5th and March 6th, both Raw and SmackDown will take place at the MCI Center in Washington, D.C. On April 23rd and April 24th, both will take place at the Pepsi Arena in Denver. On June 4th and June 5th, both take place at the Target Center in Minneapolis, and on June 25th and June 26th, both take place in Madison Square Garden. The XFL will start airing in Japan on Sky Sports in March. There are 3 things that make it newsworthy in Japan. The ownership by the WWF, tying in the Japanese media's long-standing coverage of pro wrestling in the sports pages, and the fact the Memphis team has a Japanese player. The Christian Science Monitor ran a story about advertising on shows with the main theme that despite the high ratings of Temptation Island, it is having to sell ads at discounted prices because so many sponsors don't want anything to do with the show. But listed as the #1 show in a study that sponsors avoid was SmackDown. Others high on the list include Jerry Springer and Howard Stern as well as South Park. Figure this. On February 5th, after the XFL's first weekend was such a major business success with all the hype and strong ratings, the stock fell from $19.40 to $17.81 per share, and at press time was $16.98. Among the wrestlers getting tryouts at the TV tapings this week were NWA Wildside wrestlers Rick Michaels and David Young, who held the NWA tag titles until this weekend, Onyx, as well as former WCW and New Japan wrestler Kid Romeo, who put over Essa Rios in a match tape for this coming weekend's Metal and Jack shows. Joe Dorgan, Swinger, from ECW, and Sharmell Sullivan, Paisley, recently fired from WCW, were also backstage looking for tryouts. Lita is going to England from March 8th to March 12th to promote the Insurrection pay-per-view on May 5th, which has been sold out for some time. West Coast viewers of Raw on TNN were treated to the audio mix being messed up for much of the show. This is the second time since the move to TNN that has happened on the West Coast feed, where all the interviews because of this come across like Kaiantai interviews. For those who somehow thought the result of the presidential election wasn't a total and complete victory for McMahon, who probably manipulated the end result, through nothing illegal, but you can't say his encouraging younger people to vote in the last-minute Raw tease didn't make enough difference throughout the state of Florida to sway the election while vowing to remain nonpartisan while encouraging the sign-ups. New FCC Chairman Michael Powell, when asked about how this administration's FCC would handle raunchy and violent content over the public airwaves, Powell said if you look at the ratings, 8 of the top 10 TV shows are WWF wrestling, which shows how well he knows the ratings, because the highest-rated WWF show, SmackDown, usually falls between number 72 and number 90 in the ratings, and even on cable, only one WWF show, Raw, ever cracks the top 10 these days, and basically said if the country loved wrestling, he would lay off wrestling. He said policy issues should be left to Congress. Royal Rumble was the best-selling pay-per-view in the history of Australia, breaking the record set by the 1999 Tyson Holyfield fight and beating last year's WrestleMania, which was the highest-grossing non-boxing pay-per-view ever in Australia. For UK ratings over the week ending January 28, Raw drew 400,000 viewers to Nitro's 100,000. Nitro's first hour didn't oppose Raw, so its rating increased significantly, while SmackDown had 300,000 viewers. SmackDown tapings on January 30th in Columbus, Ohio drew a sellout 11,757, paying $359,497. After doing huge business at just about every show this year, the Old Carolinas territory, which WCW can't draw flies in, proved to be tough for WWF as well over the weekend with no sellouts and mainly half-filled buildings. February 2nd in Raleigh for a rescheduled show originally set for December drew 7,828, paying $281,489. February 3rd in Greensboro drew 8,570, paying $250,853. February 4th was a split crew with Columbia, South Carolina drawing 6,845, paying $207,120, and Columbus, Georgia drawing 4,936, paying $137,258. Raw at the Georgia Dome was a solid success, drawing 24,639 in the building, which was 22,336, paying $595,606. We don't have complete merchandising figures because we are missing the Columbia show, but the rest of the shows of the past week drew $355,759 or $6.42 per head. In Raleigh, Rock and Undertaker and Kane beat Rikishi and Triple H and Haku in the main event, with Rock pinning Triple H and Angle beat Benoit in the title match. Even though both are heels, since they both don't have a program right now with the top guys, they are angling to work with each other. X-Pac returned on the show going over Bossman, and he went over Venus the next night. Greensboro had the same top 2 matches. Underneath, they played a game with a hardcore title as K-Quick beat Raven for the title, then Crash Holly beat K-Quick, and finally Raven pinned Crash due to the interference of the Mystery Woman. They also did the triple title switch the next night in Columbia, South Carolina. During the intermission on the show in Greensboro, on the big screens, they switched to the NBC feed of the XFL, which those live said was a lot more entertaining than a normal intermission. Most of the wrestlers backstage in Greensboro were watching the XFL debut on a television. Columbia had the same six-man but instead with Austin teaming with Undertaker and Kane and stunning Triple H to win the match. Of course there was a major storyline glitch in that main event because the major storyline on television is that Austin and Triple H can't do anything physical to one another until the pay-per-view, but they worked the match and fought each other anyway. At the Georgia Dome, Austin gave Triple H a stunner after the cameras went off. Columbus was headlined by Angle pinning Jericho in a great match, but we got a rare bad report on the show overall as most of the rest of the show wasn't good and lacked heat. The readers' pages. Stock price. The reason the WWF stock went down after the XFL debut is that it went up 50% based on XFL news in recent months, and the decline in the ratings as the game went on was very serious, as it pertained to the future of the league. It got an incredible rating at the start, but the overall industry perception was that the game itself was pretty poor and the extreme hype turned out to be not so extreme. Most TV shows that are successful over the long haul have a slow build. XFL looks to have a very strong initial curiosity that declines so fast over the first night that the fear is the ratings will drop quickly over the next few weeks and the show will be cancelled because the economics of the league don't work with an eventual low rating. NBC can absorb a big loss if needed, but it will be tougher for a company the size of the WWF. 9 out of 10 TV series fail. David Davis. Senior VP Houlihan Loki Howard and Zukin. Los Angeles. Wrestler of the Year. For Wrestler of the Year, I didn't consider Kazushi Sakuraba strongly. It's hard for a shooter to have enough matches to make an impact on the fans and box office proportionate to a pro wrestler who can draw huge money on pay-per-view every month and has to wrestle 3 or 4 times a week at a consistently high level and be good enough on the mic to maintain serious interest with the fans. Triple H gets the nod for having so many 4 stars plus matches with many diverse opponents, headlining so many high-grossing events and forcing the fans to take interest in him after years and years of apathy. Toshiaki Kawada comes in a close second for performing at his usual high level without as much to work with, as well as for almost single-handedly keeping All Japan alive and strong. For best box office draw, Sakuraba is a no-brainer for me. His presence against the Gracies drew big houses and big TV ratings even without anyone else on the card. WWF is far more of an ensemble, so I can't vote for Triple H or Rock ahead of him. The fact that Austin missed most of the year and the buy rates and arena gates didn't drop shows that no single WWF wrestler carries the box office at this point. In contrast, if Sakuraba wasn't around, Pride undoubtedly wouldn't have made nearly as much money. Most underrated wrestler was the trickiest category. So much of the WWF is underutilized because of their mentality that the established guys have to keep their spots, to the point half the roster could be called underrated. I was very tempted to put Kurt Angle on my list, despite him finishing the year as WWF champion, because he had potential to be so much more than a soft champion. With the evolution of pro wrestling, I feel a best angle and worst angle category ought to be added. The emphasis on weekly wrestling forces angles to be cranked out constantly, and those angles are as much a part of current wrestling as any other category represented in the awards. Todd Martin. Have you lost your mind? Triple H's Wrestler of the Year? Sure, he's a good worker. He ain't no Kobashi, Kawada, Misawa, Benoit, Juvi or Guerrero, but he's good. Sure, some people think he's had a string of great matches with guys like Austin and Foley. Crediting Triple H for those matches is like crediting Sting for all his great matches with Vader, Flair, and Cactus Jack. Not a perfect analogy, but close enough. Still, great matches they say. Sure, Triple H has been very successful. Well, the WWF's been very successful, but without Triple H, they wouldn't have been, right? Sure, Triple H is a huge draw. Well, okay, the WWF itself is a huge draw. But without Triple H, they wouldn't have been able to draw this year, right? Sure, Triple H has loads of charisma and is over big with the audience. Okay, maybe he's got zero charisma and isn't over as big as the continuously pushed top heel should be. What has he got, other than a huge salary? Wrestler of the Year? And you decided this in April? You want to name Rock as Wrestler of the Year? Okay, I don't like it, but there's an argument for it. Triple H, you're an intelligent guy. Leave that nonsense to the rubes. It's Kawada or nothing. Frank Strom. Response from Dave Meltzer. Actually, I was torn between Rock and Sakuraba. Even though the last article indicated Sakuraba, my actual vote went for Rock, Sakuraba and Triple H in that order. WCW. I haven't watched an entire WCW program since Halloween Havoc. It's really a tale of how depressing the product has been when a die-hard fan like myself becomes so apathetic he considers it painful to sit through an entire show. After hearing such great reviews for the junior heavyweight matches on the Sin pay-per-view, I decided to watch the first hour of Nitro instead of just reading about it afterwards. The first major change, the new "how many times is it now?" WCW needs to make is to completely overhaul the announcing team. I can fully appreciate being a wrestling announcer isn't an easy job. The WCW announcers are atrocious. It's debatable whether it is on their own merits, as they are clearly out there without any direction, but that's not the point. There's not a shred of credibility left in Tony Schiavone. I nearly switched the channel when he talked about how gruesome the Sid Vicious injury was at the pay-per-view. It was indeed sick. But even after seeing it, I was still conditioned not to believe him. He's the cheating boyfriend who has promised so many times never to do it again, but at this point, we know he always will. Yeah, this time WCW is going to be great. Whatever. Scott Hudson is praised by many as being a good announcer, but I can't for the life of my see why. His consistent screaming at inappropriate moments and incessant use of needless superlatives can easily negate any positives in the ring. How can you call a match great when it's still in progress? Fans don't believe a word these guys say, because it's all nonsense. It's up to the company to work together as a cohesive unit to get the workers' performances over with the fans. In my opinion, Mike Tenay should be lead announcer. If nothing else, he has a tremendous knowledge of wrestling history and knows how to give the product some athletic credibility. God knows after Russo, WCW needs it bad. We know Bischoff has the balls to make decisions. The question is, will they be the right ones? Watching the first 30 minutes of Nitro was disturbing because even though guys like Steiner and Jarrett are valuable assets, they have the loser connotation all over them because they were the focal points of WCW's abysmal run. There is a lot of talent in the company. The cruiserweight talent pool is excellent. If pushed correctly, the division can be more valuable because it's a distinguishing characteristic that the WWF will never be able to equal. The top of the card should have Steiner, DDP, Booker, Jarrett, Awesome, Goldberg, and Storm. The younger talent, especially O'Hare, need a forum where they can comfortably develop their skills so that when the timing is right, they can make a splash at the top of the card. There are many who have creative ideas and like to romanticize about how they would rebuild WCW, but it's up to Bischoff to get it done. I really hope WCW can become a viable player in the industry because it's good for everyone involved. If anything, I'm interested and will now begin to watch WCW on a more regular basis, and that's never a bad thing. Nilton Fernandez. The single biggest reason for WCW being in the shape it is currently in is the failure of the people on charge over the past 4 years to recognize who had the real talent and who didn't. How could anyone with half a brain not have seen the charisma of Chris Jericho, the wrestling skill of Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko, the heel heat generated by Eddie Guerrero and the business intelligence of Raven? Instead, they continued to force Bryan Adams, Lex Luger and Kevin Nash down the fans' throats. These men all have zero work rate and with the exception of Nash, zero mic ability as well. Hopefully this time around, Bischoff will listen less to Hogan, Nash, and Luger, and more to the fans who clearly want a massive overhaul in WCW. Jeff Beecher. New Japan. Last Saturday's New Japan TV aired all 3 matches involving New Japan wrestlers from the Inoki Bombaye show. Once again, New Japan doesn't give me any incentive to order their pay-per-views if they are going to give away matches for free 1 week later on their television show. Some interesting notes. Mark Coleman came to the ring wearing a Goldberg, "Who's Next?" t-shirt. The illusion of size materialized again. Coleman and Kerr, who I expected to look like huge monsters next to Iizuka and Nagata, were actually about the same size as Iizuka. Nagata was slightly larger than both Coleman and Kerr. Granted, Coleman and Kerr have amazing physiques, but Nagata, who nobody would consider a monster, was actually slightly bigger than both. I was also very surprised to see how much larger Muto was than Takada. You really had to do a double take when seeing Ken Shamrock. That looked like Metzger's twin brother. With long sideburns and a fresh out-of-the-salon hairdo, he looked more like a pretty boy jock than the lethal predator of the glory days of MMA. George Guida. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,